What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 790. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Las Vegas, Nevada, it's Paul Cheon. Paul, how was Super Bowl for you?
Oh, it was actually pretty awesome. I got invited to a kind of Super Bowl viewing party over at Resorts World. I had a couple of friends that were in town, so just a ton of food available, really great environment, and it was a good time. It was a good time. I wish the game was a little better. It was kind of a blowout.
It was a blowout.
Congratulations to the Eagles, and I will say there were probably a lot of Chiefs fans present because it wasn't very loud. There were a lot of people, but it wasn't very loud. So I think
it sounded
a lot of
quiet.
Chiefs fans there.
Yeah. Do you think our hair and makeup lady? Yeah. I'm a little worried about her. Yeah. She's the world's biggest Chiefs fan.
I mean, you know what? Look, you still won 3 Super Bowls in the last 5 years. I think she'll be okay.
She'll probably be all right. Yeah. This is for, I'm talking about a friend of ours at the Pro Tour who does our styling, the stylist for the Pro Tour. And she's, she lives in Kansas City and she's a massive Chiefs fan. So we might have to console her a little bit when we see her at the Pro Tour, which is coming up rather quickly. And hopefully I get a chance to play with this set a little bit more because I'm writing an article and commentating it, and it doesn't come out until tomorrow at the time of recording. At any rate, what we're going to do today is we're going to cover all of the rare and mythic rares, as well as a special guest page or a sheet for Aetherdrift today. So we're going to go over every single one. We're going to deep dive on these cards and see what's good, what bombs are here, and what we can expect from them, as these ones often are the most impactful cards that you can pick in the set. Before we do, we want to say thank you to everybody who supports us on Patreon. It's patreon.com/limited resources. If you'd like to support us there, we just want to say thanks. It just means a lot to us that people take the time to support the show. Patreon is something that we've been a part of for a very long time, and it's very much appreciated, people who support us there. So thank you. Again, there's a link down below if you'd like to check that out. Also, we want to say thank you to Ultimate Guard. You're going to be picking up new cards whenever a new set comes out. You know, you're going to get the new stuff, and you're going to need to protect those cards, whether it's at the card level, the deck level, maybe even a deck box to hold multiple decks, even like a binder to hold your collection, backpack to transport it, whatever you need, they're going to have it at Ultimate Guard. Ultimate Guard makes the best stuff in the business. There's super high quality, super well thought out designs, which I really appreciate. Makes it easier to use. Little things that you'll notice after you own an Ultimate Guard product for a while that somebody thought of. They said, you know, it would be easier to take the deck out if we put another little lip on the back of this box. Oh yeah, I can get both fingers on it, so I'm not dumping the cards out on the table ever. The little things like that, you'll see it over and over again at Ultimate Guard. If you want to check out their product lineup, it's ultimateguard.com. And if you want to buy something, you can find it at your favorite online retailer or your favorite local game store. Thank you, Ultimate Guard. We do appreciate it. We're going to be going over every single rare and mythic rare and giving it a grade. We want to emphasize, and we always do at the beginning of these shows, that our discussion is the more important part. The grade is more of a punctuation mark that we put on the end of the discussion to kind of just figure out where we landed. And we're going to give an A through F scale with a couple of exceptions as well. A's are going to be your bombs, your game winners. They're good in many situations, particularly when you're behind. That's kind of how you get to that A+ level. They're often the best cards of the set, or maybe super efficient spells. These are cards like Liliana and Zimone. B's are cards that actively pull you towards their colors. These are the cards that when you get 1/3 or 4th pick and you haven't picked a card of that color yet, you're like, ooh, I want to move in. These are sometimes the headliners for a set or archetype. They're the go-to cards or reasons to be in a color pair. Solid removal usually falls into the B category here too, just because it can be harder to get. Cards like Vampire Gourmand and Sunblessed Healer. C's are your playables. They're the pawns of limited. Interestingly, the rares and mythic show usually doesn't bring that many C's. It tends to be a bit more polarized for the rares and mythics, but there's a few. They're fairly interchangeable, and you do need some amount of these to fill in your deck. Totally mediocre removal sometimes is a C. Some combat tricks like cards like Ambush Wolf and Strix Lookout. D's. Sometimes playable, but you'd really prefer not to. These are often your 22nd, 23rd card. They're cards that are on the fringe. If you can draft around them, you will, but they make the cut a decent amount of the time. And truthfully, these days, Ds aren't that bad. They're a step behind the Cs and above, but they're not so bad that you feel like you can't win if you have to put them in there. Cards like Spitfire, Lagak, and Aegis Turtle. Fs are your total unplayables. A good shortcut for an F would be if you decided that I'm never going to play this card for the duration of the set, you would probably just be in better shape than if you tried to get cute and play it in the one situation where it might actually be okay. That's a good shortcut for it. Typical things that bring up an F are completely out of sync with what's going on in the format, huge mana costs or impossible mana costs to put together in limited. These are the types of things that you'll see. And they do actually pop up because usually with the rares and mythics is where the designers will take some shots or put in cards that are maybe not really meant for limited play, like that's something for constructed or commander or something like that. So you will see some Fs. And then there's two other categories. There's sideboard cards and build around cards. Sideboard cards are exactly what you think. They're cards that if you put them in the main deck, they would be too variant to be good on average. But if you can bring them in out of the sideboard when you're playing best 2 out of 3, they can be one of the best cards in your deck. They can be a B or maybe even an A in the matchup that you're in. But on an average matchup, they're like a D or an F. And these are cards like Broken Wings. And then build around, this is the best. And also, this is my favorite part about the rare and mythic rare reviews are the build arounds that pop up. These are cards that if you just put them into a deck that could cast them, they probably won't hold their own. They may even just be a straight up F, like an unplayable card. But if you draft and build around these cards, they can be the best card in your deck. In fact, they can be the whole reason that your deck exists sometimes. You don't want to be that all in on a build around, but honestly, like, especially if you can get multiples, these type of cards can really pop off. Cards like Ride of the Dragon Color and Extravagant Replication. Okay, we're going to start off with green. Again, we rotate around which color we start with, and for Aetherdrift, we're on green, and that means our first card up, it's a regular rare, a non-mythic rare. It's called District Mascot. It is green for a 0/0 dog mount. And it says this creature enters with a +1/+1 counter on it. So it's a 1/1 for 1. And you can pay 1 and a green and remove 2 +1/+1 counters from this creature to destroy an artifact. And whenever this creature attacks while it's saddled, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and its saddle cost is 1.
Yeah, so this, if you look at the upside of this card, it can kind of potentially get out of control, right? Let's say you're on the play and you play this on turn 1, you have a 1-mana 1/1, and then on turn 2, you play a 2-drop, you saddle it up, and all of a sudden you have a 1-mana 2/2 that's attacking on turn 2. And then as the game continues, you can continue to grow. And then additionally, this is a format that has a bunch of vehicles in it, so you can actually utilize that 1 and a green ability to kill target artifacts. So that is the best case scenario, right? You're on the play, and you have this in play, and it's great. It can become a 3/3, and then all of a sudden you have a 1-mana 3/3, and it's completely fantastic. But then the downside of this is, well, if you draw this at any point in the mid game, or even if you're on the draw, it's not the most impressive body, right? Like if you play this at some point late, it's not very strong. But this is definitely better than you would expect for a card that's just a 1-mana 1/1 that if you draw it in the late game, it still has applications. Because the reason being, you play this, let's say you draw this on turn 4 or turn 5 and you play it, on turn 6, you can still saddle this up, attack. After you attack, it gets that second +1/+1 counter. Then you can remove the 2 counters from this creature to still kill a vehicle that's in play or an artifact. So for that reason, there's still just added utility outside of of course, the ceiling scenario where you have a 1-drop this plus a 2-drop to have this grow in the early game.
So a perfectly reasonable backup plan, assuming that you can find a target. Yeah, I mean, this all adds up to something pretty decent here, right? I mean, is it a C plus? Like it's a weird.
Yeah, that I wouldn't get it into the B range just because it's going to be hard for me to envision this just completely winning the game. It'll do it every now and then if your opponent has a really clunky start. But remember, you still need to saddle this, right? Like if you have this in your opener, there's going to be times where you don't have a 2-mana play. Right, you just keep this with the 1-drop, but if you have a 1-drop into a 2-drop with the lands, yes, then you have the upside. But I do think with the utility And every now and then you're going to be able to use this with a really aggressive start to win the game. I think it's kind of a C+ level card. We'll note, I just don't. There's a lot of flavor issues with this card that I don't really like. For example, are you mounting this little cute corgi? Like, what's mounting this thing? Right? It's tiny. And
it is wearing a saddle.
Also, is it then like sacrificing its life to help kill an artifact? Like, how is this dog doing that? Anyways.
Yeah.
The card by itself.
Or is it losing weight?
But it's losing all of its weight. Right? If you do it like right away.
Oh, if you do it right. Oh, God. That's morbid. Right. Yeah, right. F for district mascot for
flavor.
I'm not killing the dog. I don't care what vehicle you have. Like, I'm just not going to do it. Like,
I don't want to sacrifice my dog.
No. Yeah. All right. C+ for district mascot. Next is Web Strike Elite. This is green for a 3/3 insect archer at rare. It's got reach. So 2 mana for a 3/3 reach. That's pretty decent. And then it has cycling for green, and X. And it says, when you cycle this card, destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment with mana value X. Is this like a Mox killer or something?
It could be, but it's also just really solid value, right? In the late game, if you just happen to run into something that you can kill, you're basically always cycling this and you're drawing a card. And so that gives you that upside of being able to play a main deckable disenchant effect, but already attached to a perfectly reasonable body, right? A green 3/3 reach. Now, noting you need to skew your mana base pretty heavily to be able to reliably play this. I'm not even saying turn 2, but maybe turn 3, right? If you play this on turn 3, it's still not terrible, right? At turn 3, you play a 3/3 reach. It's still solid, a really solid creature. There's a good amount of flying creatures that exist in this format that's trying to plink in for some damage just to get your speed counter up. And having reach creatures, I think, is really, really valuable to have as a way to combat that. So I think all in all, I think the versatility and just the good stats that you get for the mana, despite the fact that it's hard to cast, makes this a pretty solid rare. I give it a B.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think B for Web Strike Elite. If they have a 3 mana artifact and you pay 5 mana, kind of uncounterable instant speed to kill it, and you get a 2-for-1 out of it, and that's only half of what this card does. That's pretty dang good. B for Web Strike Elite. Next is Afterburner Expert. This is 2 and a green for a 4/2 Goblin Artificer at rare. It has exhaust, 2 green, put 2 +1/+1 counters on this creature. And whenever you activate an exhaust ability, return this card from your graveyard, to the battlefield.
Yeah, and it's not tapped. It's just, I mean, this card seems awesome to me. Just 3 mana for a 4/2 with that exhaust ability. That's all right. It's fine. It's a card that you'll play, but it's not going to kind of completely take over the game. But the fact that in most green decks, and if you have an exhaust deck specifically, this card is just kind of unstoppable. It's just as the games go along, you're going to have to trade with this thing. They're going to exhaust something else. This comes back into play. And you can also just use this as a way to permanently block something. You don't even need to exhaust this creature. You're like, I have a 4/2 body. I'll trade with anything that you have.
Anything.
Exhaust something. This comes back into play. So this just gives you a level of inevitability. It kind of reminds me of a very old Mythic rare. I believe it was called Death Mist Raptor, where you basically, it was like this card that just traded with everything. And every time you kind of basically unmorphed the creature, it came back into play, right? And this kind of does the same thing. So this card is just a real big pain to deal with. And most decks will have just mono green cards at common. You have 2 good green commons in the Scurryfoot and the Sheffet of the Dunes or something like that both exhausted common. I just feel like it's going to be really easy to find ways to get this back into play. So in decks that have 5-6 exhaust effects, this thing just keeps coming back and is just a really big problematic creature to deal with.
I mean, imagine casting a 2, 3, or 4 mana creature, and then your opponent goes Afterburner Expert your move. It's just, you're just like, oh my God. Like, I don't want to attack and do it and have them just trade it off. I don't care what it is. And then if they attack me with it, if they played another land, they can make this thing into a craw worm whenever they want. So it's not like I'm going to have great blocks either. And this being 4 power means you can't just say, I'll just take it. right? Because they're like, sure, take 4. Like, even if they don't use their mana on it, you're just taking a huge hit. And if they're in a defensive stance, they can just leave it back. And this thing has enough power to block most things, even without the exhaust ability being used. I mean, it trades for everything. Like,
right. And like, imagine this is good in the red-green exhaust deck. This is good in the blue-green exhaust deck. And even in black-green, you can just mill this card, right? You just mill this card and then you exhaust something and all of a sudden it comes back into play. Might be probably at its worst in a white-green shell because white doesn't, I don't think, have any exhaust. So, but as long as you have some number of exhaust, like if you have no exhaust whatsoever, this is, a C level card or a C plus or something along those lines. But given the fact that if you have a respectable amount of exhaust, this card is really hard to deal with. And if you have a lot of exhaust, this becomes like a bomb level type card. But I would say, if you have, 5 or 6 exhaust cards, what are we looking at here? Like an A- level card?
Yeah, I think so. I think an A- is where I would put it. It's so pesky to get rid of if you build around it towards exhaust. If you have just a normal amount of exhaust, it's probably like a B or maybe a B plus. This card just looks extremely annoying. Next up is Lumbering Worldwagon. That sounds like a vehicle. It's 2 and a green for a star 4 artifact vehicle at rare. It said, oh my God, the crew cost is freaking 4. Oh, wow. This vehicle's power is equal to the number of lands you control. And it says, whenever this vehicle enters or attacks, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. Wow.
Yeah, so this is getting you a ton of value, right? Just even when you play it, you're just getting a land. So it's in a ramp effect where in this format, by the way, well, we'll get into this next week, but it is a slower format, surprisingly. So you can actually cook a little bit and you can play slightly slower decks. We were kind of concerned about the red-white hyper aggro decks, but my worst record in the early access events was with a red-white deck. So I feel like this is the type of effect. Right. And this is the type of effect that you can certainly play because it ramps you. And in the late game, this thing hits really hard, right? You play this on turn 3. This is already a 4/4 because it gets you that land. And then not only that, I had this in my deck. I didn't even read the part where when you attack, you also get another land.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So and that's really, really nice. And that's why they had to make the crew cost really, really expensive because all the pilots, they can crew things. They're basically all crew 3 cards, right? They can all crew things that have crew 3 on them. So they wanted you to spend a little bit extra resources than just a single pilot to be able to crew this. But this card ramps you, gives you a bunch of value. And, honestly, could be, well, if it wasn't for Overlord of the Huntwoods, it could be the type of card that you could play in a ramp deck and construct it as well, just because it ramps you and gives you a large threat to play with. So I actually like this more than many effects like this that we've seen in the past, which is kind of, hey, 3 mana effect that gets you a land. Well, this also gives you a very significant vehicle or body that you can actually use in the late game that can get you more advantages by getting you lands or just potentially just kill your opponent.
Yeah, it has Topiary Stomper vibes, right? Not a creature when you first cast it, but it gets there. I like this card. I would view it as a split card between kind of a clunky ramp spell and a somewhat clunky but powerful vehicle. But I think those two things together ends up being well worth it, especially if the format's slower, like you're saying, Paul. So B plus. Yep. I mean,
I like B for the Worldwagon for now.
Yeah.
Just because look, the turn you played, it doesn't completely take over.
No.
Crew 4 is still hard. So you're going to have instances where you're just not going to be able to crew it that easily, right? Sometimes you play a cheap creature, but sometimes you got to block with those cheap creatures. And so when that happens, all of a sudden, this still gives you that rampant growth effect, but you really need to take advantage of the fact that this is a large body that can get you more advantages. So I don't think that I would put it at the B plus range just yet, but could certainly be wrong depending on kind of how this format plays out.
B for Lumbering Worldwagon. Next is Regal Imperiosaur. This is 1 green for a 5/4 dinosaur at rare. And it's simple. It says other dinosaurs you control get +1/+1. Is that really relevant?
There are the 5 mana 9/7 is a dinosaur.
Yeah. Okay, so let's ignore that part of the text and assume this is more or less vanilla. We're getting a heck of a lot of power and toughness for 3 mana here still. That's got to be worth it. I mean, this is just the biggest thing you can cast on turn 3.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a 3-mana 5/4, and you've always heard me say I don't like green or double pipped cards.
Right.
Unless you're getting a lot of value out of it, right? Unless you're getting a significant amount of stats. And you know what? 5/4 is a pretty good deal for 3 mana. I'll play the 10/7 mana base. Every now and then you'll have a random other dinosaur in play, but I don't think that really matters. You're just playing a 3 mana 5/4, and that's really solid. Sometimes you're not going to be able to play this on turn 3 because of the double mana pip. So that's the only thing. If this was 2 and a green, it's probably close to an A-level card. But I think because it's double green, I give it a B+.
Yeah, I mean, this is just the biggest thing. It can crew everything. It hits super hard. 4 toughness is really nice. Like, that's good enough to keep it alive in a lot of circumstances. And if you play it off curve, you don't feel like you're that far behind. I like B+ for Regal and imperiosaur. I mean, they just push the heck out. I mean, this is almost a craw worm.
Yeah.
For 3 half. I mean, 3 mana versus 6. Like...
Yeah, I was definitely doing a dinosaur check. Sadly, there aren't too many.
Dino check failed.
It's certainly a seed or something that you can potentially use for a potential dino deck in the future.
It's funny. I wonder if they put that, because that's almost throwaway text in this set, right? I wonder if they put that on there so that it doesn't meet the requirement of having no abilities.
Oh, it's just to not be
vanilla. It's just too good to like search up and,
But I mean, think about it. They pump each other. Well, so this is not relevant for limited. But what I mean is, if let's say you want to play this in a constructed deck, right?
Oh, sure.
We're living in a Llanowar Elves world now. So this is the perfect thing. If you have any kind of stompy deck, you go turn 1 Elves into turn 2 this, and then every now and then you play another one, and all of a sudden you have a pair of 6/5s. So that's probably why they put it in there as well. Yeah.
All right. Next is. This is sweet. Thundurus Velocipede. This is same cost, 1 green. This one is a 5/5 vehicle. It's mythic rare. It's got trample. Crew cost still up there. It's 3. It says each other vehicle and creatures you control enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it if its mana value is 4 or less. Otherwise, it enters with 3 additional +1/+1 counters on it. So the expensive stuff gets more? Is that what this is saying?
Like, obviously, we would prefer the little things to get the more counters, but then it would just be way too broken.
Yeah.
But as is, this card is pretty ridiculous, right? We're talking about I get it that it's a vehicle, and so you have to take a lot of points away from this, but this static ability is already just really, really strong. Any creature or vehicle that comes into play with a +1/+1 counter, and then anytime you play something somewhat big, it just gets 3 extra counters on it.
Come on.
How do you lose?
Any 5-drop, it comes in with 3. I mean, that's insanity.
Yeah, it's just so many stats for already a pretty decently costed vehicle here. Again, Crew 3 is a lot easier to pull off in this format than others because there's so many different ways to generate pilots.
Right.
And when you make pilot tokens, you can just automatically crew this thing. So this card just completely takes over the game. If you just play this on turn 3 and you play a normal game of Magic, not only that, anytime you play a creature, it also just makes it easier to crew this thing.
That's what I was going to say. It helps itself.
Yeah, you play a 2-mana 2/2, and your 2-mana 2/2 becomes a 3/3 that can crew this, and you can slam in for 5 as well. This card just seems an absolute powerhouse. I think this is probably an A.
I think so too. I want to give you a test. What if I told you 1 green enchantment, and then it has the text, 4 or less gets a counter, 5 or more gets 3 counters. Are you playing that? Is that good? Where would that sit for you? Like if you got to free roll the vehicle part.
Yeah,
basically.
I could see a world where if the format is too fast, it ends up being kind of slow. Right, where you're like, maybe it's like a C+ level card. In Foundations, we had that unicorn, right? 1 green white for a 2/2. Yep. But I think it was actually worse as a creature than it would be as an enchantment because of the existence of Burst Lightning and Stab in that format.
Yeah,
so as an enchantment, it's probably a little bit better. Mm-hmm. And you would probably still play that card. You'd be, you would still at least try it out. And I'd say at the very least, I'd probably have that as a C+ type card. Mm-hmm. But possibly better if the format's slower, like the way that I think it might be right now. And then the fact that this is a 5/5 trampler and not an enchantment, right? You got to give that at least an extra letter grade and a half.
Definitely.
Or something along those lines. So
how about A- for Thundurus Velocipede?
Yeah, if you're on the draw, right? If you're on the draw and you play this, then you can possibly get run over. But this just gives you so many stats. I guess this is not like a slam dunk. If you're behind, this doesn't help you out. But the upside might just be worth it. Where if you're on the play, I could see this being the games in hand win rate champion. If you're on the play type of card,
tokens count with this thing. Like this thing's great. Yeah, I'm gonna say A- for Thundurus Velocipede. Next is Oviya automech artisan. This is 3 and a green for a 1/2 legendary human artificer at rare. It says each creature that's attacking one of your opponents has trample. Okay, so we just need all these extra words because of multiplayer or something? Okay, whatever. Your creatures have trample when they're attacking. It also has an activated ability, green and tap. You may put a creature or vehicle card from your hand onto the battlefield. If you put an artifact onto the battlefield this way, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. I don't like what I see here, Paul.
Yeah, this is one of those Elvish Piper variants, and historically they just never quite gotten you there. Sometimes if you draw this late, you've already played your big things. It's basically you're spending an entire turn off, and you just don't have a relevant body in play, and that's really hard to do in any limited environment. Even when I say this format is kind of on the slower end, you still just can't play a 1/2 for 4 mana. Obviously, the upside is here, and obviously this is the exact type of card where I passed on this a couple times in draft and people were yelling at me because you look at this and you go, oh my gosh, I'm going to play this. And then the next turn, I'm going to put the Honey Mammoth card into play. And then I'm going to put a 7 mana vehicle into play. And oh my gosh. But you have to also just think about the body and the instances where you miss. And that's going to happen plenty of times. Now, that type of deck I could see playing this in is maybe a black-green deck because the black-green decks tend to have a ton of creatures that are quite expensive with a cycle cost, right? So we're talking about the Shifet Demon, the 7 mana 5/5 flying demon with cycling 2, that Golgari vehicle that ETBs and kills something, right? That has cycling 2. So if you have a good number of those really expensive cyclers, the Chitin Stalker, I don't know all the names, but it's the black 6/5. If you have enough of those, I can see a world where this could be playable. But in a green-white deck or a green-red deck or just any normal speed deck, this is just going to be bad. I just would rather not play this card. I'll give this a D, and until proven otherwise, basically.
Yeah, I think I would give it an F.
Okay, sure.
These type of cards never, ever work. I mean, here's the problem, right? In order to make this actually worth the setup cost of playing a 4 mana 1/2 and having to have it survive an entire turn cycle to be able to be activated, you need to be getting more than 1 or 2 mana out of it, right? So you need to be it's not uncommon for the turn after you play Oviya that you would have a 5th mana anyway and could just cast your 5-drop. In that case, if you put in a 6, you are a turn ahead, but that's a Llanowar Elf, except for you didn't get to use it on turns 2, 3, and 4, right? So that's not good enough. Now, if you get up into 7 mana where you're 2 turns ahead of schedule, okay, you are talking some business there, but how many 7-drops are you going to put in your deck, and how often are you going to draw them when you don't have Oviya, and now you have to wait until the normal time frame where they're slow, clunky, if they're in your opening hand, it's something akin to a mulligan. I just don't like any of those scenarios. None of that stuff it gets me going. The thing that is kind of interesting about this is the extra counters on artifacts. So if you have artifact creatures or vehicles, that's a thing. Also, I guess you get to do this at instant speed, right?
Right.
So it is usually that sorcery, if I remember correctly. So maybe this is where you can have this just say go and it kind of freezes your opponent up because they just don't know what you're going to do. So maybe D. Maybe there's enough wiggle room here to get it to the D range.
Because the first turn you untap with this card, let's say it lives. Scary. You basically, if it's kind of an evenish board, let's say you're slightly ahead on board. Do you really want to attack into this?
No.
Probably not for the first turn.
No.
Right. And so then this might almost you either wait a turn and see what they put into play, because a person with Oviya in play simply they're not gonna try to sandbag a creature just to try to get you. They're gonna just put their creature into play at end of turn. And so if you have enough things to play, if you have a couple of vehicles, I can see this being somewhat playable, but there's a lot of conditions that you need to meet. I think this is probably going to be at its best in a black-green deck that's got a lot of expensive cycling creatures that you can put into play. And this does work nicely with, like I said, some of the huge Golgari vehicles that you can play in the format.
That part is tempting.
You can get some value. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll go D for Oviya automech artisan. There's a little wiggle room here. Then you can tell, by the way, that they tried to get this better. Right? Like giving things trample, like why? What does it have to do with anything? Getting the vehicles or artifact creatures extra counters is just like, bonus, bonus, bonus. You could tell that they didn't want to do a normal Elvish Piper. So we'll listen to them. D for that one. Next is Agonasaur Rex. This is 3 green for an 8/8 trample dinosaur at rare. It has cycling for 2 and a green, and it says when you cycle this card, put 2+1/+1 counters on up to one target creature or vehicle. It gains trample. Are you kidding me? And indestructible until the end of turn. I mean, when I read 3 GG for an 8/8 trample, I'm like, what's the downside? Like, what do I got to do? I got to sack something. I got to discard a card. It's like, no, you can cycle it, get a card back, and give your use it as like an insane combat trick. Like, what is this?
I mean, this is we no longer live in a force of nature world. This thing is just ridiculous across the board, right? 5 mana for an 8/8. We talk down on a lot of just 5 mana vanilla statted creatures because they can be chump blocked and what have you. But when you toss trample, that completely changes the game, right? Because you can no longer chump block. This thing will end the game very, very quickly. So 5 mana for an 8/8 trampler is something that you'll play all day, every day. Very, very strong card. And then you just tack on the fact that this is an excellent combat trick as well. Cantripping, it draws you a card and gives +2/+2 and trample. And sorry, permanent +2/+2. This is 2 +1/+1 counter. So this is just an incredible split card, good at basically all points of the game, as long as you have a creature in play, right? And if you're behind, well, guess what? You just put an 5 mana 8/8 trampler into play. That's probably going to help you stabilize on board as well. This card is just ridiculous.
This is ridiculous. Let's do a little thought experiment here, Paul. Hey, look, there's an uncommon. It's 2 and a green. Can't be countered. Target creature you control gets +2 gets 2 +1/+1 counters, gets indestructible, and it gets trample until end of turn. And you draw a card. Like what are we giving that combat trick, right? That's like a C+, maybe a B-. Like, it's hard to imagine a scenario where you don't 2-for-1 your opponent by doing that. It either protects it from combat, it lets your creature win a blocking scenario. It saves your creature from a removal spell. Like and you're cantripping you're not even down a card. Like that's a pushing a B combat trick. Yet this is tacked onto we call these a rate monster, right? Like something that's been pushed so hard. A 5 mana 8/8 trample. Are you out of your mind? Like that card already is a B+ or an A- or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you combine both of that. This probably is just an A, right?
It's an A.
You got because the combat trick, that's a B- at least. I think that's a really, really good combat trick. The draw card on it really puts it over the top, and so you're smashing basically a B- level, potentially B level combat trick with an A-, B+ level creature. Right. You combine that flexibility together, and I think you just get an A level card here.
Yeah, A for Agonasaur Rex. I wouldn't say it's the most clever design. It's kind of just hit you on the head with everything you've ever wanted. Last green card is obvious. It's very obvious. Last green card is called March of the World Ooze. This is 3 green for an enchantment at Mythic rare. And it says creatures you control have base power and toughness 6/6 and are oozes in addition to their other types. And it says whenever an opponent casts a spell, if it's not their turn, you create a 3/3 green elephant creature token, which is actually a 6/6, right?
Correct. You get a 6/6 token. So here's kind of my for 6 mana, you basically whatever board you have, they all just kind of get upgraded into 6/6s.
Right.
So the question is, when you cast this, how many creatures do you have in play, and how much power and toughness will this actually give you as a bonus? Let's say you have 2 creatures in play. That's kind of reasonable. It's not crazy. If you have 2 creatures in play, let's say one is Shafet of the Dunes, it's a 4/4 trampler, and then you have, let's say, a 3/3. So for 6 mana, you've gotten +2/+2 on your 4-drop and +3/+3. That's not even that strong, right? For 6 mana, you've gotten 5 power and 5 toughness worth of stats. So in that instance, that card's not very good. If you have 4 creatures in play and some of them are small, this is giving you a pretty decent boost. But I'm also looking at the downside of this, where sometimes you're going to have a big creature in play where this doesn't even do anything. Or sometimes you just have one creature.
Could this shrink your creature?
It could possibly. It's going to be pretty hard.
Agonasaur Rex out, does it make it a 6?
Agonasaur Rex, yes. It could shrink it. I would assume that on average, this is going to at least give you like at least 2 power and 2 toughness on your creatures for the most part. But yes, it can shrink your creatures. And then sometimes you're going to have instances where you have just 1 creature in play. And if it turns that 1 creature into it gives it extra 2 power and 2 toughness, that's also not particularly strong. So I'm just looking at the worst case scenarios for this. Also, that other piece of text, whenever an opponent casts a spell, if it's not their turn, that's not even that irrelevant, right?
No.
Like once you play this, if they just have an instance, they're just going to cast it on their turn. Like if they have an instant speed removal spell, it's easier to play around. Now, if this was whenever an opponent just full stop plays any spell, then yes, this card gets really interesting. But it doesn't. So you're just not getting an elephant very often, right?
I mean, it basically just says your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. Like they're never, ever going to do it. So the only type of cards that really shuts down are counters.
Yeah. And so I do see the upside. It's also hard to cast. It's triple green. And so it's kind of trying to do its best overrun impression, but falls to the trap that you need to have trample attached to it to actually have it be really scary. Whereas in this instance, it kind of pumps up a few of your creatures. And I just want to caution people because this looks really exciting. And first time you read this, you think about a situation where you have like 4 1/1s in play. You're like, oh, hell yeah, hit you for 24. But that's not going to happen as often as you think. So I just feel like people should temper their expectations on this card. I don't think this is an A-level slam dunk type of bomb that you might think at first glance.
No, this card looks mediocre to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I would compare it more to something like Overrun, right? Where like you kind of get this, it's not temporary, but you get this big boost and that might win you the game on the spot. But it also might, like this type of card that leverages your opponent's removal against you. Like the more things that they've killed, the more things that they continue to kill, really works against you. And that second clause, like you said, Paul, it's basically irrelevant. Even if your opponent's sitting on a counter spell and somehow they don't counter March of the World Ooze, they're just going to not cast it. Like, it's just
we'll note that if you have ways to go wide, if you have some ways to generate tokens, like for example, the 3 in a blue, the Thopterus, the 3/2 that makes a 1/1 Thopter when it enters the battlefield. If you have a few more cards like that, then of course this goes up in value significantly, right?
Definitely.
This certainly gets stronger. So I don't want to just say this is completely unplayable. I think there are decks where you play this and sometimes you need an overrun effect, right? Sometimes you just kind of want a way to close out the game. So I don't know, maybe this is like a C+, C level type card.
I would give it a C. I think the closest comp that we've had recently is a card like Preposterous Proportions, where it heavily rewards you for going wide. If you do, you will win the game most of the times that you cast that card. This one's a mana less, but a little harder to cast on color. And it's similar. If you have 18 creatures and 4 of them create an additional token or something, or have the ability to do so, I'm probably going to throw March of the World Ooze in. I mean, this is a game winner the turn that you cast it if you've gone wide. But boy, I want that scenario to be true for sure. Like, I do not want to mess around with this card otherwise.
Yeah, because you're also in green. I mean, there's just no shortage of things to do if you're green with your mana. You have a bunch of the exhaust cards.
Yeah.
And there's just a lot of expensive creatures that you can also just play. So 6 or 7 mana slot is pretty highly contested. So then you got to think, how much better is this than even the 6-mana 6/6 reach creature that gains you 4 life, right? There are going to be instances where this is worse, and so you have to kind of weigh that as well. So I think there are decks where this card can be really cool. It's very flashy looking, but just cautioning that if you think this is an A-level card, I think that's not going to be correct. So.
Yeah, there are decks where it could be, but not on average.
Yep.
Okay, that's it for green. We'll go to white. Our first white card is called Basri, Tomorrow's Champion. This is white for a 2/1 legendary human knight at rare. It's got white, tap, exert Basri to create a 1/1 white cat creature token with lifelink. By the way, this one pairs very nicely with the March of the World ooze. It's also got cycling for 2 and a white. And when you cycle this card, cats you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. There's no way I'm cycling this card like ever.
Yeah. There's also just not a ton of cats in this format, I don't think. So
only the ones that Basri makes. So yeah, it doesn't really work that well. So yeah, so if we take the cycling off the table, as it'll be a rarity when you would actually want to do that, call it a backup plan. White for a 2/1 that can pay white, tap, exert to make 1/1 lifelinkers. Yes, please. That's great.
Yeah. I mean, just a really, really solid creature. It's never bad. If you can't attack with Basri, you just make a cat. I mean, most of the time, you're probably just going to want to try to make a 1/1 lifelinker every other turn if your mana allows.
Right.
But if you can still just attack with this card. You're always going to play this. You're going to be very happy with it. I don't think it's something that that'll just completely take over the game necessarily, but it's a really, really solid creature. I'd give it a B+.
Me too, B+. Mainly because it's 1 mana. Speaking of 1 mana, Voyager Glidecar is also 1 mana. It's white for a 2/3 vehicle. It's an artifact. It's rare. And it says, when this vehicle enters, scry 1. Okay. Also, the crew cost is the right one. It's 1. And it says, tap 3 other untapped creatures you control. Until end of turn, this vehicle becomes an artifact creature and gains flying. And, wow, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. So you get to crew it, send it to the air, which it doesn't normally have, and it gets bigger, all from a rather heavy crew cost, let's say, 3 other untapped creatures you control.
Yeah, we'll note that it just becomes the artifact creature until end of turn. We've seen some cards where it turns the vehicles permanently into an artifact creature, but that's not the case here. I feel like that tap 3 other untapped creatures mode is just really tough to pull off in a normal limited setting. So that just doesn't happen very often. So it will happen, but I think you mostly want to kind of evaluate this as a 1 mana 2/3 vehicle, ETB scry 1 with a crew cost of 1. And I'm not just generally, after playing this format for a bit, I'm generally not a big fan of vehicles unless they give you a significant resource of some kind other than just power and toughness worth of stats, right?
Yeah. Same.
So for example, the velocipede, I don't mind because that is a 2 and a green creature that basically gives you mana ramp, right? So that gives you utility. But if it's just like a 3 mana 3/3 with menace or something like that, I don't want that. And this just to me looks very similar to the common 1 in a white 3/2 vehicle with crew 1 that enters a battlefield and scries 2. Yeah. Right. This doesn't seem appreciably stronger than that type of effect. Now, I might be downplaying that tap 3 other untapped creature's ability, but when you do that, your opponent can just hit you back for so much.
Yeah, I mean, the way I see it is, and it's weird because this looks aggressive, but I don't think it is. I think if you have Glidecar and 3 creatures, you just pass. And your opponent's like, okay, I don't want to attack you. So then on end step, you go, okay, put a counter on the Glidecar.
Right, but you still need to have 3 other creatures in play.
Very difficult to set up.
That happens on what, turn 5, turn 4?
I mean, that's assuming that you haven't needed a trade and your opponent hasn't played a removal spell. It's very difficult.
Yeah. I just don't see too many instances where I think this card is going to really shine. Just a 1 mana vehicle. It's not looting or anything when it attacks. It's not doing a smuggler's copter impression. I think this is a card that they mostly made as an extra card to play in your what is it? That Convoke deck. You can it's another Warden of the Inner Sky variant, but it's also an artifact, so you can cast Gleeful Demolition on this and make a bunch of 1/1 tokens. For limited, I think this is not particularly strong. It's probably
Is it a C?
I'm giving it a C minus.
C minus.
I think, and yeah, I almost was considering giving it a D plus, but it's a one mana vehicle that doesn't do that much.
Yeah, I think the one thing I do like is that if the game does stall out or go long, this is a reasonable place to put no mana resources and actually build up a reasonable threat. So you get a little something back, but yeah, it's a C minus and it's closer to D plus than it is to regular C. Next is Bulwark Ox. This is 1 and a white for a 2/2 Ox mount at rare. It says whenever this creature attacks while saddled, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. I guess that's just anything. The saddle cost is just 1, so that's nice. And it has an activated ability. Sacrifice this creature. Creatures you control with counters on them gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. You know, it's tough because gaining hexproof and indestructible until end of turn isn't that great. It's okay, but it's like a primarily defensive mode that is face up in many ways, right? Your opponent can see that you can do this. So I don't want to, you don't want, you'll take freebies like that because this card's just fine without that. But, that isn't the type of thing that comes up very often.
Yeah. I mean, oftentimes you don't really want to sacrifice this creature anyways. This is a 2-mana 2/2 creature that puts a +1/+1 counter on something every time it attacks. That's great.
Yeah.
Right. And you play this turn 2. Oftentimes you're just going to be putting the counter on itself just so that it can survive combat and just continue attacking. But if you're talking about a 2-mana 2/2, that's a 3/3 when it attacks. And then if you survive that combat, all of a sudden you get 4 power and 4 toughness worth of stats for 2 mana. That is a great, great deal. This card is awesome. It's not quite Luminarch Aspirant, but it's kind of trying to do a decent impression of it. And if you do happen to find a way to put +1/+1 counters on some other things, then that ability is not completely irrelevant. I think this is an awesome, awesome creature that you're basically just going to slam in all of your and basically all your decks. Who am I kidding? Yeah. This is a card that you just want in all of your decks.
Any deck that can cast it. Yeah, I mean, I like B. It might be a B+. I would just go B for Bulwark Ox. Look, it does need to be able to attack, and it has to start at 2/2. So if you play this on turn 4 or 5, you can crew it up and attack and make it a 3/3, but they can just trade or eat it in some scenarios. It is a curve out style creature. It's a good one, though. If you have it on 2 and you can attack with the next turn, it's going to be a 3/3. They're going to have a hard time getting in front of it. So yeah, I like it. I like it at B. What do you like for Bulwark Ox?
I think I'm going to have it a little bit higher, probably B+ for me. Just the upside is just if you're on the play and you have this thing and you just saddle it up, it just becomes a complete nightmare. They have to kill it in some way. And if you have some type of a trick to have it get through, and then there's also just other mount synergies. This is a mounts I love. Vehicles I don't love. Mounts I love because they're just normal creatures and you don't run into that issue where if the Voyager glidecar, the previous card we talked about, was just a creature, and even if it was like a 2-mana 2/3 creature, I would like that. I would not mind that card at all. Right. But the fact that it's a vehicle puts away from it. I think this card is just excellent in any proactive strategy, and I would be very, very happy to first pick this card in those types of decks.
Okay, so B+ for Bulwark Ox from you. I give it a B. Next is Skyseer's Chariot. This is 1 and a white for a 3/3 vehicle at rare. It's got flying and crew 2. It says, as this vehicle enters, choose a non-land card name. I never like it when this is the beginning. Activated ability of sources with the chosen name cost 2 mana more to activate.
Crew 2?
Crew 2.
I mean, it's probably a constructed type card, and you're just looking at a 2-mana 3/3 flying vehicle with crew 2 and just kind of trying to figure out if that's something that you want to put into your deck. Isn't that mediocre? It is pretty mediocre. I think having the fact that it's a flying creature definitely helps a little bit, especially if you're starting your engines and you want to find some way to get some damage through. But this is exactly the type of card that I have not been liking so far while drafting this format, where it's just a body and you need to crew it. And if your opponents kill your other creatures and you run out of creatures, it doesn't do anything. It didn't give you any value the turn that you cast it. You can't even look at your opponent's hand to try to figure out what you should be naming here. So I just don't think this card is particularly strong. I mean, 2 mana for a 3/3 flyer, but it's a vehicle. Yeah. You got to take a lot. You got to take what letter grade even more
At
away
least,
from,
especially for crew 2.
Especially for crew 2. So I think this is like a, I don't know, like a C- level.
C-?
C, maybe, yeah, somewhere around there.
I would say C- for Skyseer's Chariot. Next is Perilous Snare. This is 2 and a white for an artifact at rare. It has start your engines, and it says when this artifact enters, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until this artifact leaves the battlefield. Nice. And it has max speed. You can tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature or vehicle you control at sorcery speed. Wow.
This is an A.
Dude,
I played with this
Oblivion Ring with upside?
This card was ridiculous. Also, it has start your engines on it, which obviously it's got the max speed effect. But
while
sometimes
killing
I've had
a creature?
sometimes I've just had decks where I just couldn't start my engines. I had a lot of ways to get some damage in. So yeah, this card just is absolutely amazing. It's a premium removal spell that also just completely runs away with the game, start your engines going, and then also when you hit max speed, like how are you going to beat this card?
Right.
No way. It's just absolutely ridiculous. I splashed for this card once, and basically every game that I played it, I won the game. And yeah, this card is just phenomenal. I think Perilous Snare is an A.
So A for Perilous Snare. That's incredible. Maybe the only nitpick on it is that it's an artifact, and we've seen a few, there are ways to kill artifacts, but whatever. A for Perilous Snare. Next is Guardian Sunmare. This is 3 white for a 5/5 horse mount at rare. Saddle cost 4. Okay. It does have ward 2, so that's a good start. And it says whenever this creature attacks while saddled, search your library for a non-land permanent card with mana value 3 or less, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. Wow, coming right after Perilous Snare too. I see a combo.
That's the combo.
Wow. Yeah. So, dang, that's a nice one. I really like ward 2 on that as well.
Yeah, getting a lot of value here. And remember, this is not a vehicle, right? It's just a 5-mana 5/5 with ward 2, which is a fine card. And then the saddle cost is high, but that's because the value that you're getting out of this is so great. If you can just put anything that costs 3 mana into play, right? Even if this trades with your opponent's 5/5, you still got your value, and you're still reasonably happy with this. And there's gonna, if you ever have some way to have this survive a combat and you attack with this twice, right? Then all of a sudden you've gotten so much of an advantage that it's kind of hard to overcome on just a really, really nice body. I think this card's really, really solid. Obviously, when you play it, it's still just kind of a 5/5 body, but it does promise you some pretty good value as long as you can kind of saddle it up and have a decent card to fetch with this. I think Guardian Sunmare is like a B+ maybe with that ward 2.
I would have it in the A range. I would give it an A-. Yeah.
A-.
Maybe an A. I mean, look, here's the things I really like about it. 5 toughness, ward 2. So those are both nice things to give it a chance to actually survive a turn cycle to get turned sideways. The other thing I really like about it is that, yes, the saddle cost is high, but one of the issues with saddle costs and crew costs is that they leave you vulnerable to a crackback attack. This somewhat solves that. You can go get a 3-mana creature from your deck, put it onto the battlefield, and it can now be the blocker that allows you to do this again the next turn. And, if your opponent has a 4-mana removal spell and you're on the play, like they can't kill this thing. You get to have that turn to attack and get the saddle going. So I like A- for Guardian Sunmare. This card just seems like it could run away with the game, and it's actually set up to do so.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I can see that. There is a good number of removal that exists that will at least be mana neutral at common that can deal with this, and you still have a full turn to try to find an answer. You have the murder variant that exists. You have the 2 in a blue that taps something, which I do think is actually more playable in this format than I initially thought.
Okay.
And then you of course have the single blue bounce spell, which can potentially be a blowout if they saddle it up and then you bounce it. I do think the card's really, really good, and I see the upside. I can see going up to A-. I'm going to still stay at B+, but I do think the card's very strong.
Yeah, that ward 2 really helps it out a lot, I think.
Definitely, 100%.
Next is Salvation Engine. This is 4 and a white for a 6/10 vehicle at Mythic Rare. The crew cost is freaking 6. It says other artifact creatures you control get +2/+2. And whenever this vehicle attacks, return up to one target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Is this just all nonsense?
Well, no, I mean, obviously you have to be blue-white. Like you have to be blue-white and you have to be super, super heavy artifact creatures, right? You just have to kind of be the artifact creature
like
deck.
Heavy enough that I'm okay with playing this as like a 5-mana anthem?
Yeah. I mean, it's a super anthem though, right? It gives you... It gives you +2/+2. And let's say the question is, how easy is it to pull off a deck that's, 10 artifact creatures in your deck, right? 10 to 12. And if it is, then this card, if you can pump 2 things, well, keep in mind too, then that you're pumping up your artifact creatures, which makes it easier to crew this thing, right? Because it's already pumping it. So in any normal deck with like 4 artifact creatures or 5, this is just like an F. Right? It's just not something that you want to play. But in a truly dedicated blue-white artifact deck, I think this card can be a bomb. Right? You play this and you have a million creatures in play. Also, you can search for this with the Transit Mage. It's a 5-mana artifact. It's going to be probably one of the best things you can. Although Transit Mage is not an artifact creature, which is kind of funny.
That's funny.
I think if you draft your deck around this and you have a super heavy artifact/vehicles deck, I'm talking 12 plus. This is, I think, an excellent top-end card to play in that type of deck. I don't know how, and then there are some number of decent, strong artifacts like vehicles with cycling. So if you can get some of those big things into play with this card, there's also value there. But I think the only home for this is probably just a blue-white artifact deck that has, like I said, like tons, like almost all your creatures have to be artifact creatures. But if you do, then yeah, this is like an A- level card in that deck.
Okay, I like it. Build around A- for Salvation Engine, but you really hit a heavy emphasis on the build around. Next is Spectacular Pileup. This is 3 white for a sorcery at rare. It says all creatures and vehicles lose indestructible until end of turn, then destroy all creatures and vehicles. So we have a Wrath, and that's a pretty nice sweeper. It also cycles for 2 mana. That's really interesting, right? Because one of the fundamental issues with sweepers is that we are still playing limited. You don't get to play a pure control deck with no creatures or something like that. You also have creatures. And the way it normally plays out is that if you have a sweeper in your opening hand and you're a good, thoughtful player, you can usually craft a game plan where you get a significant amount of value out of it. Or it becomes a reset button in case things go off the rails. But in the games where you're at parity or ahead, it can be difficult to make this like a big win for you. It kind of resets things, or you kill more of your own creatures, or even in some weird scenarios where you top deck it a little bit later, it's just uncastable. Like you just literally don't want it at all. And cycling gives you a backup plan for all of those downsides. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Now, I will say Wraths are always just... It's really rough in limited because white is typically a very proactive color. It's a color that wants to attack. So Spectacular Pileup in a red, white, or green, white deck is just not going to be very good in my opinion. Just because your deck, the game plan for those decks is to play to the board. You want to play a bunch of mounts and vehicles and beat down. So in those decks, if I'm green, white, and I open a Spectacular Pileup in pack 3, I just probably don't want to take it.
Yeah.
But if I'm drafting maybe more of a slower blue-white control deck with some counter spells and card draw effects, or more of a black-white mid-range deck, I think that's where Spectacular Pileup will be very nice. And with that cycling attached to it, I can see playing it as kind of a B+ level card. But noting that you need to make sure you have the right deck for it, because do not just put this in your red-white low-curve aggro deck, because there's just going to be so many instances where you're just cycling this card.
And then it's kind of bad.
And then the upside is very limited. For those decks, it's probably like a C level card, because maybe there is going to be an instance where you can set up a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-2, something like that. But in many, many instances in those decks, you're just cycling this card.
Okay. So what do you give it overall?
B+.
B+.
Yeah,
I like that. It has upside.
In the right decks. But the thing is, even some of the blue-white decks are trying to put like a critical mass of artifacts and creatures into play to be able to cast your affinity spell. So there are instances even in a blue-white deck where this might not be as great as you would think, because you're going to go creature, play an affinity card, play the salvation engine with a bunch of things in play. And so maybe even in those instances, it's not as great as you would think. I still think it's nice. There is blowout potential. You play this card, it can be the only card in your entire deck that can save you.
Yeah.
And it'll have an effect that no other card in your deck can replicate. So
I really like that it hits vehicles too, because sweepers when vehicles are around just suck. Last white card is called Valor's Flagship. It's 4 triple white. So 4 white, 7 mana for a 7/7 legendary artifact vehicle. It's mythic rare. Crew costs 3. It has flying, first strike, and lifelink. And it has cycling for X2 and a white. So 3 mana minimum if you want to do X equals 0, but you can scale it up from there. What happens when you cycle it? You create X 1/1 colorless pilot creature tokens, which do the pilot thing where they can saddle or crew as if they had power 2 or greater.
Yeah, so this is kind of a weird hybrid between a Decree of Justice, which is an old card that we've seen, which same cycle cost would make a bunch of 1/1 soldiers. Or if you hard cast this thing, I mean, it does just win you the game, right?
Does.
Like how if they can't kill this thing, you're talking about a 7/7 flying first striking lifelinker.
Right.
And so if you can they can never attack you unless they have a way to kill it, but it does cost 7 mana. And there are a decent number of ways to kill this thing, but you also have the out where if you're on 5 mana and you don't think you can get this in play, you can cycle this and still make a couple of pilots, which isn't the worst thing in the world. Also noting that this combos really, really well with a couple of reanimation effects that exist in the format, where it lets you there are cards that let you reanimate vehicles and turn them into creatures. There's a white one, which we gave a pretty low rating, but I believe it was like a 3 and a white sorcery that returns an artifact and turns it into a creature. And so that means this just comes into play as a creature. There's not even a crew cost attached to that as well. There's also the 4 and a black reanimation spell, which I believe also might target vehicles. It definitely at least targets a creature, and then you make a pilot. So if you can get those to go with this card as well, then that gets much, much better, because you can cycle this early and then reanimate it. And if this ever just lives, it just straight up wins you the game, because it's the ultimate Baneslayer Angel. But it does cost 7 mana. 7 is a lot.
Mana intensive 7 as well, with the triple white in there. Crew cost is just right for a card like this, though. 3 is right where you should be, a pilot, or a couple of creatures can crew it up. And
if you're behind, this does make it so basically they can't attack. It forces the removal spell. I want to like this card, but there's just too many strikes against it for me. The 7 mana casting cost with triple white, and you need to be able to crew it. You have to have all of those things in place for this to be able to go. And occasionally you'll get to that point of the game where you're very behind and you can cast this but not crew it, or you cast this and they go, cool, kill your last creature. You can't crew it anymore. I kill you, whatever. I don't like that. That is not the same thing as casting a creature that stabilizes the board unless it's killed. This is a step off from that. It's not that far off, but it is off. And then the cycling is really inefficient. I mean, you get your card back and you get a couple of bodies, but like if I dump 5 mana into this, I get 2 1/1s and a card. Like, that's not very good. Like, even for pilots, that's just not very good to get 5 mana, create 2 1/1s, draw a card. Like, I don't even know how good that card would be. Okay, fine. As the game goes longer, maybe I could get 3 or 4 if I, save up 7 mana. Or maybe I could have just cast this thing instead. That type of scenario. None of these really blow my mind. I feel like I can't rely on casting it and crewing it as much as I would need it to get to this mana cost. And the cycling's a little bit clunky. So I want to go a little low on this, even though I agree with everything you said, man. If you do stick this thing and you can crew it, like, you're not dying that turn. That is a way to survive. I think there are 2 decks in particular where this card will shine more than others. Mm-hmm. And the 2 decks that I'm looking at is there's the black-white deck where you can maybe cycle this and there's multiple reanimation spells to get this back into play. If you can cheat this into play
now you're
as
talking.
a creature, this is the ultimate payoff card, right? And it has a cycle, so it just it doesn't suffer from some of the reanimation effect problems that we've seen in previous formats, like in Duskmorn, where Shroud Stomper, you just want to get Shroud Stomper into the graveyard, right? This one lets you cycle, put it into the graveyard, and then you can, if you ever reanimate this thing's absolutely ridiculous. And then in blue-white, because in blue-white, you do have a couple of ways to make this cheaper to play, right? You have the 1 in a blue artifact creature that taps for a blue mana for artifacts, and then you have the 2 in a white 2/4 artifact creature that makes artifacts cost 1 less. So if you can get this into play on turn 6, that's a significant difference. And when you're blue-white, you have a couple of ways to be able to do that and get it into play earlier. And then when you are specifically black-white, if you can find ways to reanimate it, it gets better. Now, if you're talking about playing this in just a normal green-white deck or a red-white deck, I don't think it's particularly strong, because you're just kind of looking at this at face value, and getting to 7 mana is very difficult.
Okay. Here's the tough part. What do you want to give it?
Oof. God, the stats are just so great.
I mean, like lifelink, flyer,
first strike.
You hit once with it in your stable. You're able to crew it and block in your stable. That's very nice.
And noting that, like I said, this format has felt a little bit slower than initially anticipated. I keep thinking
about that, because I haven't had a chance to play. But if it's slower, that definitely helps.
Yeah, but. Yeah, I don't think it definitely doesn't get to the A territory for me just yet, unless the reanimation deck proves to be really, really strong or whatever. But I do think you can kind of, in the right deck, you don't just jam this in every deck. Well, you probably will at first just to play it out. But I think in a deck that where you can maybe reanimate this or find ways to ramp this out in some way. Maybe you're doing a weird green-white ramp deck with a bunch of accelerants. I mean, this does help you stabilize. I don't know. What do you think? B?
B.
Okay.
It's kind of
like
a chicken. It's kind of a chicken grade.
Like
yeah, because I mean, there's times when this is just a straight up A+, like legit A+, right?
Right.
But there's times when it does almost nothing. That's a tough one. Blue. Blue is next. First blue card is called Mindspring Merfolk. It's blue for a 1/1 Merfolk wizard at rare. It has exhaust for blue, X, and tap it. And to do this, you draw X cards and put a +1/+1 counter on each Merfolk you control.
Yeah, so it's a 1 mana 1/1. Basically, it lets you Mindspring, which is blue, X, draw X cards, and then you just get 1 +1/+1 counter on this thing. So almost all of the value of this card is, of course, just to draw a bunch of cards with this. And then you just kind of have to factor in, like, all right, at what rate do you think you're going to be happy? Let's say you play this turn 1, turn 3, you draw a card and you turn this into a 2/2. It's okay, right? It's all right. But then, of course, the longer the game goes, this card can just draw you a ton of cards while still being a 1-drop where, look, in a pinch, if you have this in play and you need to block with it, turn 3, you just turn this into a 2/2 and you just trade with a bear and you draw a card. Sure, that's fine, right? But then as you get later into the game, right? I mean, just having this draw you 3, 4, 5 cards can be quite strong, especially in a format that might be a little bit slower than anticipated. So I think in a really fast format, this card's probably pretty bad, just because it's just it's a really heavy mana investment. But it's still a 1-drop. It's a 1-drop that that does have the potential to win you the game in a very, very kind of late game scenario. But you're not getting a lot of combat stats out of the deal,
right? You're getting the benefit of spending 1 mana in a time when you don't always get to, like on turn 1. But the downside to it is that you only get to do it once, and it's a 1/1 until you do, and your opponent knows,
right?
Like literally any removal spell in the format will kill this. So if they ever choose and happen to have said removal spell, they can just kill this. That said, if you play a 1 mana creature and they're like, okay, I'm going to use my removal spell on it because you're going to do something powerful with it in a turn or two, that could be a lot worse for you. In fact, in most scenarios, you will be ahead on that transaction. Right. Downside, big downside, of course, is just if you're facing a fast or powerful deck where you just don't have the time. This is a very clunky card.
Yeah, it is. It is. So, I don't even think this gets into the B range.
No.
I think it's just, do you want to give it basically like a C plus or a C?
I think I would give it a C.
That's fair.
Next is River Churn Monument. This is 1 and a blue for an artifact at rare. It has the activated ability 1 and pay 1 and tap it. And then it says any number of target players each mill 2 cards. And it has the exhaust ability of 2 blue and tap it. Any number of target players each mill cards equal to the number of cards in their graveyard. I do enjoy an alternate win condition. Mill is totally fine. I actually don't care what it is. I like cards that allow me to focus on one specific goal in a game. And also I like cards that give me inevitability, that if this card sticks around and I get to use it enough times, I will win regardless of anything else that happens. Those are both things that I find interesting, attractive. I really like that. But I don't like cards like this that just don't do anything else. Like all it does is sit here and mill. You just can't spend a card to have this type of effect on the game.
Yeah, and not only that, it just costs mana. This is the new and improved Millstone, but still, this is you just can't play Millstone type cards in a limited environment.
No.
If this was a free mill effect, that would be interesting. But the fact that you still have to spend 1 mana every single turn to be able to activate this ability. Now, this will win you the game if you can somehow find a way to stabilize the board.
Right.
But it's at the cost of a card. And I just don't see how in the early phases of a game, you having the mana to continue to tap this to keep milling out your opponent. It's just going to be really difficult to do so. But if you do this, let's say you tap this ability 3 times, all of a sudden they have 6 cards in their yard. Then you exhaust this card, or you maybe tap this 4 or 5 times. Then with 1 exhaust ability, you can potentially just kill them.
Right.
But it's a lot of mana.
It's a ton of mana and a ton of time, and this card does not stabilize you. It does not do anything to help you get to that point.
Yeah, I'm going to give River Churn Monument an F.
I would
I just don't think this is the type of strategy that you should try to go for, unless you have a very odd blue-white deck with spectacular pileup. You're just a bunch of card draw and counter spells and removal spells, and you need some way to win the game. And then you can utilize this. But you never have to take this early.
No.
Just because nobody else is going to take it. And then if you do pick 1 up, maybe 2 up, you could use it as your win condition. But I'm never going into a draft trying to draft a River Churn Monument deck.
No, I think there's 2 other things to consider. One of them is that this is an artifact and will catch some collateral damage on people being able to destroy it. And the other thing is that if we did want to give it a non-F grade, it would be in the sideboard category, where if you are finding yourself in a situation where you're in 2 very slow decks facing off against each other, let's say you're in a blue-black mirror or something where your artifact is less likely to die, this could be something you could bring in, shift around some of your removal or defensive speed, and rely on this to win the game. But that's in a best of 3 scenario. So just at face value, I'd give River Churn Monument an F. You should not try to play cards like this, generally speaking. What in the world? How am I supposed to?
Good luck.
Vinwixit?
Sure.
This is like Fibblethip's cousin or something.
Maybe, yeah.
Verbose Host. So this is 1 and a blue for a 0/4 legendary homunculus at rare. It's got start your engines, and it says you have no maximum hand size. Who cares? And then it has max speed. If you would draw a card, draw 2 cards instead.
So
it's a 0/4. What the?
Yeah, it's a 0/4. And here's the thing, though. I will say, for max speed cards, from what I've seen so far, it's not who gets to max speed as soon as possible. That rarely happens where I just beat you down and get to max speed. Oftentimes, you chip away with some evasive cards, with some pack dolls. You just find random ways to get in for damage, and it's actually more of a mid-range battle where you're trying to leverage and find positions to get some damage here and there to get to maximum speed, and then you have some payoffs, right? We looked at the Necro Regent last week, which was the 5 mana 5/4, which you were very right about, and I was wrong about. That card's awesome. It's the 5 mana 5/4, start your engines, end of turn, make a 2/2 zombie.
Oh, yeah.
When you have maximum speed. That is a B+ level card. That card is very, very strong. And you have to probably look at this as something in a similar vein, where yes, it's very odd to have a 2-mana creature with 0 power as start your engines, but it's just to get it going so that you can have other things that you can play to at some point get to maximum speed. Once you do, then you get to draw an extra card every turn. Or if you have other card draw effects, you get to draw even more cards. Now, that being said, I still don't think this is particularly strong because you are still just playing a 2-mana 0/4, but there's definitely a value in just being able to play a card with start your engines. And then this payoff is strong, right? If you do get to maximum speed, you're not going to get there quickly. But if you can find a way to draw an extra card out for this at some point late in the game, or let's say you play this late and you already have maximum speed, all of a sudden, if this thing lives, you do get to draw an extra card. So I think it's better than it looks because it looks like a D or F level type card. But I think there's enough going for it. Also, I think 4 toughness is pretty relevant in this format. Yeah, because there's a lot of creatures with 3 power to help with the crew 3 vehicles that exist in the format. There's lightning strike. There's a bunch of 2-mana 3/1s. So this does a pretty reasonable job of holding the fort while also starting your engines and giving you a payoff for getting to maximum speed. Now, all that said, where do I think this card belongs? Probably a C-.
Okay.
Nothing too high. I think it
build around C+ or something like
maybe. Yeah.
Like you said, it is a legit win condition if you can make it go, but it's just so much easier to give high grades to cards that not only that work towards the goal that they're going for, and this one doesn't. Like it just even if it had 1 power. I was thinking the same thing. Make it a 1/4, and man, I am on board. Because you could chip in with it and a couple of 2/2s, and they're like, okay, I guess I have to take the stupid 1 from the homunculus. Vinwixit?
Yeah.
Vinwixt?
Doesn't seem bad.
Vinwixt. How about Vinwixt?
Yeah. Sure.
I'm going with Vinwixt, the verbose host. Okay, so build around C+. It's a kind of insulting grade for Vinwixt, but whatever. Next is Repurposing Bay. This is a 2 and a blue for an artifact at rare, and it has the activated ability, pay 2 mana, tap it, and sacrifice another artifact. If you do, you search your library for an artifact card with mana value equal to 1 plus the sacrifice artifact's mana value. Put that card into the battlefield and then shuffle at. You can only do this at sorcery speed.
Yeah, so this is a birthing pod variant, but for artifacts. This is a card that you are just never going to really be able to realistically pull off in draft. This is an F. It's a cool card. I'm sure people are going to try to make it work, but these effects just never play well in limited, and this is purely just a card for constructed.
Yeah, we might need a new category for cards like this, which is just called screenshot. Right, which is like, this is an F, but send us a screenshot if you ever do the thing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Next is Thopter Fabricator. It's 2 and a blue for a 4/4 vehicle. It's rare. It's got flying and crew 2. And it says, whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying.
So Mischievous Mystic on a vehicle. And this one I like because this one gives you some utility, some extra value. If it was just a 3-mana 4/4 flyer with crew 2, we wouldn't be all that impressed with this card. It would be fine. It would be, some C-level vehicle that you play in your deck. It is big, right? It's a 3-mana 4/4 flyer. But all you need to do is just cycle. And there's a lot of different ways to cycle in this format. So triggering this just isn't all that difficult. So if you just, or there's also looting effects, right? The blue-red deck, for example, has a ton of ways to draw extra cards. So in those types of decks, I think this is a really nice build-around card. And on top of that, it is a creature that just hits very, very hard. So I think this is a card that I'm pretty happy with playing. It's still a vehicle. I think, I'd probably give it a B+. I do like this card, but it's still a vehicle. But if you can play this and then just cycle something immediately the turn that you play it, you get that Thopter right away. I mean, that does give you a good amount of value. Now, I did have a deck where I took this pretty highly, and I was kind of short on ways to draw cards. And so then it was kind of underwhelming. But in the cycling deck, this card can get up to, an A- level type build around card just because you're just cycling, making Thopters.
Yeah. I think I would give it like a build around B.
Okay.
Like you said, if it's just at face value without the extra ability, it's like a C or something like that. But I think that if you have 3 or 4 cyclers Yeah, sure. I mean, 1/1 Thopters are real cards. I mean, that's a very solid payoff for this. They also help crew it, and it is huge.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I think I put it up a little bit higher.
Because it's big.
Just because it's I mean, it's very big. I was talking I think we'll have to play a little bit more, but I do feel like getting that 4th toughness is really, really relevant in this format.
Yeah.
And so this is different than, for example, the 2 and a white 3/3 flying vehicle with crew 1 at uncommon. So 2 and a white for a 3/3 flying vigilance. I think that vehicle is pretty bad. Okay. I think there's just the sizing doesn't really work out. You can lightning strike it, but 4/4 is a significant difference. I know there's crew 2 attached to it, and the upside, if you can just make even 1 Thopter off of this, you're pretty happy.
That's true.
Right? And then if you make 2, then this card's just awesome.
Then it's going off. Okay, so yeah, B plus range for a Thopter Fabricator. Next is Unstoppable Plan. Let's just see how unstoppable this plan is, Paul. It's 2 and a blue for an enchantment. It says at the beginning of your end step, untap all non-land permanents you control.
This is a very stoppable plan. It literally gives your creatures vigilance.
Yeah.
That's all it does.
It lets you crew.
Yeah. And very importantly, it doesn't untap your lands because we've seen how broken effects like that have been constructed in the past. So, this card's just an F. Yeah. Don't play it.
It's very stoppable. Next is Mu Yanling Wind Rider. This is 2 blue for a 2/4 legendary human wizard, also pilot, at Mythic Rare. When this creature enters, create a 3/2 colorless vehicle artifact token with crew 1. Vehicles you control have flying, and whenever 1 or more creatures you control with flying deal combat damage to a player, draw a card.
Yeah,
but it's not a pilot.
It's not. It doesn't crew things that have crew
it doesn't
3.
Crew at 4 or whatever.
Yeah.
2 extra.
But I mean, we're still looking at
this
a 4
thing's
mana.
Sweet.
Yeah, we're looking at a 4 mana 2/4 that makes you a 3/2 flying vehicle as long as it stays in play. And then whenever anything with flying hits your opponent, you draw a card. So imagine you just have a flyer in play already, and then you play this, you smack them, or a vehicle, and then you just draw a card.
Yeah, this is great.
This card is just fantastic. 4 mana for a 2/4 that makes you a 3/2 vehicle with this ability and giving all your vehicles flying. I think Mu Yanling's an A.
I think so too. Also, interestingly, this does crew 3, right? Because you can play this crew the 3/2 and then 3/2
crew the thing you make.
Yeah. So it's a little convoluted, but you can get there. In
a roundabout way. Yeah.
I like A, especially if you have a vehicle already in play, because it gives that thing flying. You can crew at least up to a 3 with just what this card gives you, and you can hit them and draw the card. I mean, that's pretty strong.
It's just got every line of text on this card is relevant and strong.
Yes.
And they just and even if you have nothing else in play, right? You can still just utilize this by itself as a card advantage engine, right? You just have a 3/2 flyer that draws you a card every turn. So
and it's 4 toughness, which you've mentioned feels important. So A. That's a nice one. Next is Waxen Shape Thief. This is 3 and a blue for a 0/0 shapeshifter at rare. It's got flash and cycling 2. And what does it do? You may have this creature enter as a copy of an artifact or creature you control.
Yeah, so I've generally not been a big of clone your own thing type effects.
Same.
Just because, there's sometimes you just won't be able to copy the thing that you want. I much prefer, obviously, some things that can clone anything, right? Because then you just have twice the options. But this does have flash, and they also gave it cycling. So I think this card is playable just because of those 2 things, where you can use this to potentially ambush somebody. And then if there are no good targets, you can still kind of cycle it away. I don't think it's great, but I think it's better than variants of this that we've seen in the past, like Visage Bandit, for example.
Yeah, for sure.
And I would give Waxen Shape Thief a C.
Yeah, I like C plus maybe. I mean,
okay, sure.
Flash means that you do get to leverage something that you already have to be better. Yes, it's win more. It's not what we really focus on, but Flash is nice. And also, even though I'm not the biggest vehicle person, like you do get to copy vehicles and those are less vulnerable, than, you put this on the stack. If you only have one creature, they kill it and you're like, okay, well now this dies, or I have to copy something really bad. And in this case, you could be like, okay, I'll copy my best vehicle or whatever. At any rate, not super stoked on the Wax and Shape Thief, but I think that there's enough here.
Sure.
I think the thing to remember is that if you do have to cycle this, it's bad. Like that's not a good thing for you. Like that's a cost. Last blue card is called Possession Engine. It's 3 blue for a 5/5 artifact vehicle at rare. Crew cost 3. And it says, when this vehicle enters, gain control of target creature an opponent controls for as long as you control this vehicle. That creature can't attack or block for as long as you control this vehicle. Huh?
Yeah, this card is super strong. Basically it's 5 mana for a 3/3. You basically kill a creature until they kill this
crew.
But then you can use that creature to crew. Oh. And then if it's got any relevant piece of text on it, you can also utilize that ability as well. So, let's say you steal a mana creature, you can still tap it for mana. Or if you steal, something with some kind of passive ability, you can also use that. And if you just steal a big creature, you can still use that to crew the Possession Engine and have that attack as well. So, we talked about cards like the Detention Chariot, which was a 6 mana 6/6 vehicle, which enters a battlefield and exiles a non-land permanent. I feel like this is just kind of a better version of that, right? It costs one less. And then you steal the creature, so you can also just crew the vehicle when you need, as long as the coast is clear to do so. So I think this card is very, very strong. And I think this is close to a bomb level card, honestly.
Okay, yeah, this does seem really good. This is one where they could even push their crew cost higher, and I would kind of get it,
Yeah,
because that's kind of the point of the card that you stole. So, what do you want to give Possession Engine? Like, is it an A?
I'm kind of stuck between whether or not I think this is an A or an A minus. It does help you when you're behind, right? You play this.
Absolutely.
If your opponent has a big board and you play this on, let's say they hit you for a bunch and they played a big creature. You steal the big creature. They can't attack you, right? You have a 5/5 that can block. You need to have a way to kill this thing. So it's probably an A.
It's probably an A. I mean, I think the fine line to cut here, right, is, do I get to steal a creature that's untapped and gives me effectively 5 mana 5/5 kill your best thing? Right? If that's what this card is, that's an easy A. That's even better.
Right.
If they're attacking you and you steal it and it's 5 mana kill your best creature, and I may be able to crew this with what I have to still give me like at least a partial 5/5, that's still pretty damn strong. I mean, that's good too.
Yeah. And the fact that even in some of the artifact shells, you can even ramp into this.
Yeah.
With some of the cost reduction elements of it as well. It's already reasonably costed, right? Mm-hmm. This is just, I'm happy just paying 5 mana for this effect, but imagine just playing this on turn 4, right?
Yeah,
you have
that's
a 5/5
ridiculous.
vehicle, then you stole something. That just straight up wins you the game.
I like A or maybe A minus for Possession Engine. It does ask you a few things, but it's a good payoff. Next is black. Move this black. Our first card up is Gas Guzzler. Excuse me. This is black for a 2/1 vampire rogue at rare. Wow, it has start your engine, so there's an early start. And this creature enters tapped, and it has max speed. You can pay black and sacrifice another creature or vehicle to draw a card. Yeah, I found something good to do with vehicles.
Yeah, if you're kind of looking to be aggressive, if you're looking to kind of somewhat be aggressive, this card is just a perfect way to kind of get things going for a 1 mana 2/1. And then it enters tapped, and oftentimes when we see 1 mana 2/1s, we get I feel like people get overly excited, where they're just like, yeah, 1 mana 2/1, this thing's gonna be great. I'm gonna have it on the play every game and just curve you out. Mm-hmm. But of course, that's not how Magic works all the time, and sometimes you draw this late and it doesn't do as much. But despite all of that, oftentimes just almost any deck is interested in starting your engines. Black has some of the best payoffs, I feel, once you get to maximum speed, because it's not just some mana creature. It's some way to draw cards or some way to make tokens or something like that. So I think this card is a very, very solid card to just play in those decks. And, this, even in the late game, is fine if you're at maximum speed. You still just have this sacrifice outlet that lets you throw away some cards that might not be relevant for extra cards. So I think Gas Guzzler is like a C+.
Yeah, C+. This reads a lot like an uncommon,
Right.
Next is The Last Ride. This is black for a 1313 vehicle with crew 2, but and it's a legend, by the way, in Mythic Rare. But it says The Last Ride gets -X, where X is your life total. So it starts off at -20. But you want to augment that life total, you can pay 2 and a black and 2 life to draw a card. So this does give you something of a tool to get your life total lower so that this becomes a viable threat. But if you look at it as like a turn 1 play, it's not really a vehicle because it's going to be a long time before you can crew it. And then you're looking at the activation cost. That's a lot. Like 3 mana? I mean, the 2 life is one thing, but 3 mana and you just get a card?
Yeah, this is kind of an interesting take on Death Shadow, right? This is just Death Shadow, the vehicle.
Right.
And it also has kind of its own built-in way to deal a bunch of damage to yourself. But then you have to kind of ask, paying 3 mana to draw a card and paying 2 life is just not something you're really interested in doing in limited Magic.
How can you win games doing that?
Right. It needs to be a very specific matchup where you're playing against another control deck, and then you just kind of use this to draw maybe 3 or 4 cards. Some combat happens, and all of a sudden you have a reasonable vehicle.
Right.
But I think in just a lot of instances, you're just not necessarily going to have the time to do this. I can see this being an interesting sideboard card for slower matchups, but I don't think I'd really be interested in starting a card like this because it just doesn't do anything until you're at 10, 9, 8, right? That's when you actually have this be kind of a relevant card. And then what is that, turn 5 or 6 of the game?
Yeah.
Then you just have a vehicle that's a 5/5 with crew 2, I guess.
Which is okay.
But that's it.
But at that stage of the game,
Yeah, but there's just no evasion attached to this, no keyword attached to this. I mean, I can see instances where this can give you some value, like I said, in really slow matchups, but I don't think this card is very strong.
I don't either. I would give The Last Ride either a sideboard, whatever, C or something, or I would probably just give it like a D.
Yeah, I have it at D.
Yeah, not great. Next is, reprint Bloodghast. This is black for a 2/1 vampire spirit at rare. It can't block. And if, just let that settle. It can't block. This creature
double black can't
block. Creature has haste as long as an opponent has 10 or less life, and it has landfall. Whenever a land enters, you may return this card from your graveyard to the battlefield. These are typically in limited, only useful in decks that have heavy sacrifice themes, and that doesn't seem to be the case here. Particularly so.
There is a small, like in black-white, I think there's some sacrifice stuff happening. So,
but there's no just like turn it into a card, right? Or like turn it into counters, or like what are we looking at?
Yeah. So there are a couple, but one is a rare, and it's nice with the Gas Guzzler if you get to maximum speed. You can sack it. You play a land, sack it, draw a card. That's not bad.
Yeah.
And then there is a black-white rare, which we'll get to later, which is a 3/2. When you have maximum speed, whenever you sacrifice a creature, you get a 2/2 tapped zombie token.
Okay.
But that's a rare, right? So I can see instances where the Bloodghast can have some utility. And then, of course, there's also the uncommon Final Vengeance Bone Splinters variant where it works with that as well. So I think in a sacrifice deck, this card is still not great, but it's like a card that you can play and justify playing. But in most decks, I would not want to play this card. Double black is a really, really huge cost. It can't block, right? So I just don't think, it looks exciting because there's a lot of text on it, but it's just all kind of underwhelming overall. 2 mana for really hard to cast 2/1 that can't block isn't particularly strong.
It's bad. I mean, that's bad.
I give Bloodghast like a D. And
yeah, maybe it's bad.
Maybe, I mean, maybe on average, it's like an F in most decks,
right.
but like in a sacrifice deck, it's like a build around C minus
right.
C.
I mean, it's
type
just
card.
Yeah, that's what I think. I think on average, you just can't afford to put this in your deck. I mean, I was going to make a joke. It did lead me to realize one small upside to it, which is that in a land of vehicles, even if it can't block, it can crew. And so like it could become a sort of a blocker of sorts if it's crewing vehicles that can block. The joke I was going to make is that it's a combo with the last ride because it gets your life total down so quickly because you can't block. Because like you either can't cast it or you can't block. So it's like your life total will plummet rather quickly when you have a Bloodghast. I think my guess is that if you never played Bloodghast in this set, you'd probably be better off than if you tried to on occasion. But like you said, we could go build around C minus or D plus or something in the sacrifice deck. Or combo. Next is Quag Feast. This is 1 and a black for a sorcery at rare. It says choose target creature, planeswalker, or vehicle. Mill 2 cards, then destroy the chosen permanent if its mana value is less than or equal to the number of cards in your graveyard.
Yeah, so this even if you have nothing in your graveyard and you play this, you can basically kill any 2-drop or less, right? You can just kill any 2-drops. But in most instances, this is going to kill a lot of what you want to kill. You're going to trade. There's also a self-mill element in black and green specifically. And in a lot of cases, for 2 mana, you're just going to be able to kill anything. And that's really powerful. And self-mill also is going to be something that's helpful to you if you're doing the self-mill thing as well. So I think Quack Feast is a really solid removal spell and also just gives black a way to deal with vehicles, which it might have some trouble with just because black's typically not a great color at being able to kill vehicles. So I think Quack Feast is a very, very solid removal spell to play.
Yeah, it looks like a bee to me.
Yep.
Also, I like that like before you cast it, whenever you hear mill yourself and then you feel like, well, am I going to get there? It's like, no, you'll know. You can pick. Next is Crypt Caller Chariot. This is 3 and a black for a 5/5 artifact vehicle at rare. It's got Menace and Crew 2. And it says whenever you discard 1 or more cards, create that many tapped 2/2 black zombie creature tokens.
Yeah, I mean, talk about a payoff for cycling.
Because that does discard a card, right?
Right. When you cycle, you discard a card. And then also, specifically, I think in black-red, red has several rummaging effects as well.
Oh, yeah.
And so it also works with that. So this is a card that you're definitely going to have to build around because 4 mana for a 5/5 Menace with Crew 2, I mean, that's fine. Like you can play it if you randomly need a big thing. But at that point, it's not very different from the 3 and a red 6/3 Menace Crew 3 vehicle, right? It's not appreciably different. But if you can build around this card, I mean, can you imagine how you feel if your opponent plays this, untaps and cycles 2 cards?
Yeah, I mean,
you're just like, oh my gosh, right?
The question is just, is it too slow? It's 4 mana, do not very much. It is a vehicle, right? It goes right in between. This is where vehicles are interesting because sometimes you can crew it up and block. You don't need that much. It's Crew 2. It's not Crew 3 or 4. So it's like, okay, that's something. But the zombies are tapped. So like they untap, they cycle a couple of things, they get 2 extra zombies. But like, effectively, the shields could have been down for 2 turn cycles there, and that is too much of a cost to pay. Like, you'll get ran over by any sort of assertive deck in that scenario.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. If they don't kill your creature, right? Let's say like you play a 2-drop and a 3-drop, right? And you don't trade or you keep a creature around. When you play this, it can still act as a pretty decent blocker.
It can,
right? Because in a lot of instances, they're not always killing your creature on turn 3. They're playing their 3-drop, and then you play this.
Yeah.
And then it's really hard for them to attack you because you have this 5/5 that you can crew up. So I do think it gives you enough. Like, obviously, you don't want to play this and then just attack with your creatures and then shields down, you take a bunch of damage. But if you play this kind of with a more defensive approach in mind because you know you have inevitability, I think that's really strong. Okay. Because it is a very, very big blocker as long as you have a creature in play. And, maybe it's one of those instances, too, where because you know that you have this on turn 4, maybe you don't trade 2-drops. right? Because you want to have that 2-drop in play to be able to play this so you don't take more damage in a later turn. I've had that issue when I was playing my games where sometimes it was just, I just shouldn't have blocked with the creature because I had a bunch of vehicles and I just needed to have the creature for the vehicle. And so this could be one of those instances. But the effect is undoubtedly strong, but you have to build around this. You need to make sure you have either a good number of cyclers or draft like a black-red deck, because that also gives you rummage on top of that. So I think both of that, as long as you build around it properly, I think this card can be quite strong. I think like build around this is like a B+ level
B+,
card.
Yeah, build around B+ for Crypt Collar Chariot. Next is Curse Cloth Wrappings. This is 2 black for an artifact at rare, and it says zombies you control get +1/+1, and it has an activated ability. You can tap it, and it says target creature in your graveyard gains Embalm until end of turn. The Embalm cost is equal to its mana cost. And just as a reminder, it says exile that card and pay its Embalm cost. Create a token that's a copy of it, except for it's a white zombie in addition to its other types, and has no mana cost, and you can only Embalm at sorcery speed.
Yeah, and there are a decent number of zombies in this set, more than you would kind of expect. We are kind of in the Amonkhet plane. I think Black-White will have some number of zombies. So the Antip effect is relevant to some degree, but the most important part of this is obviously just being able to reuse the creatures that go into your graveyard. So, for example, this card I think could be quite strong in a black-green self-mill deck, right? Where you just kind of play this and all of a sudden you just have endless gas. You just embalm everything that falls into your graveyard and you get a value, and it gives you inevitability. Now, noting that when you do play this, you are not adding to the board in any meaningful way. For the most part, maybe you have a zombie in play and you get a +1/+1, but the effect is very strong. And if the format is slower than expected and you can afford to play an effect like this with the proper amount of mill and maybe some sacrifice stuff, this card can be very strong. I've lost to this card a few times already in draft where they untapped and I didn't have enough pressure and I was like, uh-oh. Right? They're just embalming every single turn, and all of a sudden they just get creatures with that Anthem effect on top of that, where it can kind of take over the game. Now, if you're getting run over and you're on the draw, you play against the Boros or Selesnya aggro deck, yes, this card is not something that you want on turn 4, but you build around this and you have this maybe as one of your only kind of quote-unquote do-nothing cards. This card can be the type of card that just gives you that inevitability that lets you kind of win any mid-range matchup.
Yeah, I really like cheap creatures with this too, like where you could potentially set up like a turn 5 where you play it and maybe like you target like an engine rat, the 1/1 death touch. For
I was thinking the same creature. Yeah, that's the perfect creature for this.
Right, and it's already traded off to help keep your life total high so that you actually have the time to use your Curse Cloth Wrappings. This is a powerful card. It is a little slow, but you know, you're not losing life for this. It's basically taking a turn off to get it down. And then, you know, at least in the near term, you could think of it like a card that says like, you know, 4 mana, take the 2 creatures from your graveyard and put them back in your hand. You know, it has that type of effect. The difference is that it continues to last where when future creatures die, those also end up going back to your hand. I know it's not the same thing because Embalm exiles and all that, but my point being that, you know, this does give you most likely inevitability, and that can be powerful even at the 4 mana slot here. I like it. I'm optimistic that this format would be a little on the slower side. I mean, in a fast format, this card sucks. I mean, you do not want to be messing around with this. Right. But I think in a medium or slower format, then it's actually quite strong.
Yeah, I think Black has a lot of tools to actually survive to this point too. We're talking about Grim Bauble and the Engine Rat, right? That you can play as perfectly serviceable 1 mana plays. I mean, the Grim Bauble is obviously probably the best common in the set. And then you have the Wreckage Wickerfolk. It's a 2 mana 1/3 flyer, ETB Surveil 2, which also kind of helps feed more cards into your graveyard, acts as a decent blocker. You embalm that, then you have a 2/4 flyer that surveils 2. So you just have 2 solid creatures to play early. So I just think Black has enough tools to survive. You have to draft around this, of course. You don't want to play Curse Cloth Wrappings and just a million 6 mana cards.
Right.
But, you know, even if you play some big cyclers, right? You can cycle and then you can play them later on in the game as well to get value. So I've had this card have a pretty good impact, and if you can build around this, I think this is probably like a B+ level card.
Okay, build around B+, regular, probably B- or something if you're not like really working towards it.
Right.
Next is Gaunty Night Minister. This is 2 black for a 3/4 legendary Aetherborn rogue at rare. And it says whenever a player, 3/4, I said that. Okay, whenever a player casts a spell they don't own, that player creates treasure token. And it says whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller looks at the top card of that opponent's library and exiles it face down. They may play that card for as long as it remains exiled. Mana of any type can be spent to cast a spell this way. This is worded a little bit weird, right? But in just a 2-player game, it says whenever you deal combat damage to one of your opponents, you get to look at their top card, exile it, and you can play it anytime you could for any color of mana.
Yeah, so it's basically a 4-mana 3/4 with whenever you connect, you get to basically steal a card from your opponents. That that's kind of what Gaunty is known to do.
Right. And then so you get a random treasure?
This is another thing. And then when you cast a spell that you steal, you get a treasure.
Why? Like, because you can use any color of mana anyway, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just extra value.
It's just an extra bonus. Okay.
It's just an extra bonus because they wanted to give you something a little bit more, I suppose. And then this is clearly a card that is interesting in Commander. So in Commander, you can never have it too much mana, right? Mm-hmm. So being able to just steal something and then they get treasures, you just get extra value that way. But it's
sweet.
Yeah, it's weird because you would think because you can cast it for any mana, you don't need the treasure, but you're going to complain about getting free treasures?
I'm not going to complain. No, I'm not going to complain. I will take my treasure.
4 mana for a 3/4 with this effect. Now, it does take some setup cost, right? Because if you just play this, there's no guarantee that you're actually going to be able to connect with anything, right? So, but it does have kind of that blanket Ophidian or Enduring Curiosity effect that we've seen. And if you set up a board where you have some kind of flyer and you just hit them once, like this card is obviously very, very solid. Now the body, 4 mana for a 3/4 isn't ideal, but if you do have, I would say you probably want an aggressive deck to have this deck actually do anything, or you need a deck with a lot of flyers, because if you're kind of more of a defensive deck, what are you actually connecting with? You need to find something to connect with, and this doesn't have evasion or anything like that. But there will be a gotcha moment with this because your opponents probably won't see this coming, and you can probably set up a scenario where you can at least get in for one with this and get some value. But the other Gaunty that we've learned to love in the past, the 4 mana 2/3 Death Touch, that gave you immediate value. 4 mana for 2/3 Death Touch, enter the battlefield, get value. This one, you still have to connect. So I am taking points away from that as a result, because 4 mana 2/3 Death Touch obviously way stronger than 4 mana 3/4.
Right.
So I'm not entirely sure what I want to do with this. Like if I have a bunch of, Wreckage Wicker Folks in my deck and ways to make Thopters, this definitely gets better. But if I'm playing a deck with a bunch of random ground creatures, I think it gets worse.
Okay, I'm pretty high on it. Like generally speaking, these type of creatures, even if they're just do it for themselves, can be pretty scary, particularly if you can combine it with anything with flying. This is a card that you can play and hit them right away. And it's like, even if Gaunty dies, you can still cast their card later. I mean, this really is only asking that you can get in at all. Like just full stop. Can you get in? Even some scenarios will come up where like you just can attack with an engine rat after you cast this. And they're like, crap. Like I either have to take this hit or I have to trade my 3-drop for their stupid engine rat. Like those type of scenarios come up too. I like this card. I would give it a B+. I think this is the type of card that can have a huge impact the turn it comes down, and it doesn't ask that much. Yes, you do need to be able to attack, and that can be difficult, but I mean, that's kind of the point of many decks, so.
Yeah, I think I'm going to give this a B.
Okay.
Because I see the upside, and the upside is this is an A level card where you can play a couple of flyers and get it in. I'm just looking at the fail cases as well and trying to kind of merge the two into what I think this would ultimately land. Because if you're kind of on the defensive or you're on the draw, then all of a sudden you just have a 4-mana 3/4 body.
And that's pretty mediocre.
Obviously, and that's pretty mediocre. But the ceiling is super high for this, and it's a really exciting card to try to play and build around. So I'm trying to balance that because I feel like the floor of this is like a C+, B- level card, and the ceiling is an A- level card. But I think I'd average this out to a B, but I'm perfectly willing to be wrong and have this be a B+ level card because it is very sweet.
Okay. Next is the Speed Demon, which is 3 black for a 5/5 legendary demon at Mythic Rare. It's got flying and trample and start your engines. And it says at the beginning of your end step, you draw X cards and lose X life, where X is your speed. Oh my God.
I just don't like that I don't like that this is not a May.
Dude, this could kill you very easily.
It can. Can you like what if you top deck this and you're kind of racing and it's kind of close and you're at like 7 and you have max speed? You just die. Right? You go to 3.
Yeah, this is one where like if it's your only max speed card, that's kind of perfect. Or start your engines card. Yeah.
Yeah. Or another card where if you can find ways to just not take a bunch of damage early with engine rats and whatever, this is an awesome top end card. Right.
I mean, it's just interesting because like drawing 1 extra card and losing a life is like, that's good. That's where you want to be.
But 2?
2, maybe. 3 is like no way because you can't deploy that many cards anyway. And 4 is like you're going to kill yourself like really fast.
Yeah, I guess this was a balance thing, but I am kind of surprised that it's not a May ability. Because
it would be kind of
because the downside is so great now. Because if you, a lot of black decks do care about starting their engines early, there's a lot of really good payoffs. And if that's the case, and then you play this at maximum speed, your opponents can just be like, all right, go. And then you just take 8 damage. So there is a real cost to putting this. Now, of course, the upside is also awesome.
It is.
And if you have less to start your engines type cards and other ways to maybe gain life and not take too much damage, I mean, this card is great. It's a 5-mana 5/5 flying trampler that draws you cards.
Yeah, and I mean,
at the cost of life.
Right. And, if your life total is reasonable, even if you take 3, hit them for 5, next turn you take 4, you've drawn 7 cards over 2. Yes, you've lost 7 life, but you've drawn 7 cards over 2 turns and already hit them for 5. Like, can you not figure out how to finish the game from there? Usually you can. It might be 1 turn away. Right. It might be like, I have all the tools I need, but I'm constricted by mana. I can get you down to 2, but you can then crack back on me, that type of thing. This does feel like playing with fire, but it kind of feels like it's the kind of fire I want to play with.
Fun.
Like maybe Fireworks is a better, there's a little bit of risk here, but they're pretty cool.
I'm wondering how many ways there are to gain life in this format. That would help out a ton.
Yeah.
Green has the vehicle that gains you 2 life that ramps you, and then also the Honey Mammoth variant, which I'm forgetting the name, but it's a 6-mana 6/6 gain 4 life type card.
Yeah.
If you have a couple of effects like that, it certainly helps because that helps against the downside scenario of the speed demon. But let's just say you don't have a lot of start your engines and you're playing more of a mid-range deck that can try to ramp into this and take over with effect like this. Oh, there's also the 5-mana removal spell that gains you 2 life. Right, the -6/6. So if you can find enough ways like that to survive, this card will just win you the game. But the downside is very real, and there will be games where you have this in your hand and you just can't cast it.
That's right. And that is something that you do have to consider because, when we get up into that A range, A+ range, we're talking about cards that take a situation where you were actually behind in the game and now you're either at parity or ahead. Those are very, very, we don't see those basically ever, but this is definitely not that. This is closer to a win more card where like if you're doing well, this will 100% shut the door on the game. But if you are behind, dude, you may not be able to cast it. You may be able to just say, I literally can't put this card on the battlefield because if I do, I'll tap out, I'll take 2, and my opponent will just untap and they have lethal, right? And for your bomb, for your first pick, that's a tough pill to swallow sometimes. That being said, I would be willing to risk this until proven otherwise. I mean, generally speaking, the fact that you have a 5/5 flying trample means that you are the one who's going to close out the game very, very quickly. Additionally, let's say you play this and you're at speed 2, you draw 2 cards. What is your opponent supposed to do? You have a 5/5 flyer. Like, you can block and you can just throw it in front of anything, because if they kill it, you're ahead. Like, you drew 2 cards already.
You drawn the card right away.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of got the Unholy Annex vibes. It's not as good as Unholy Annex because that lets you drain, but it's kind of got that.
Yeah.
You kind of feel
I would
that
start
as
out
well.
high on it, though. I think that, yes, we have to recognize the very real downside, but like, I would say on average, it's a B+. It might even be an A-, but I would go B+ on Speed Demon.
Yeah, I give it a B+ as well. Fully recognizing that in a lot of games, this is an A.
It's an easy A in so many games.
There are also games where this can be a D, right? Where you're just like, well, I can't play it, right? So you know, your first pick slam dunk, rare, you want to have it be good always. And this is the type of card where it's good 85% of the time, maybe even 90. But there are the games that you can't play it. So I like it at B+.
Last black card is called Demonic Junker. This is 6 and a black for a 4/3 vehicle at rare. The crew cost is 2 on this one. It has affinity for artifacts. Just as a reminder, that means it costs 1 less to cast for each artifact you control. So it looks like a 7 drop, but it could be down in the 5/4 range, depending on how you build around it, or even cheaper. It says, when this vehicle enters, for each player, destroy up to 1 target creature that player controls. If a creature you controlled was destroyed this way, put 2+1/+1 counters on this vehicle. That's cool. So you could just straight up blow up one of their creatures and that's it. Like, you can just do that because it's up to. But if you have something small that it just isn't doing anything, or it's locked up under some enchantment or whatever, you can blow that up and make this thing into a 6/5 instead of a 4/3, which is just like, what, random upside.
We'll note that this is very expensive. It costs 7 mana. So
does it?
I feel like, well, that's the thing.
Yeah.
I feel like in most decks, or in a lot of decks, like, that's not blue-black artifacts. This is likely going to cost you 6 mana, maybe, right? You'll have like an artifact in play if you're just drafting a non-artifact deck. Maybe 5. If you play it for 5, you're pretty happy.
Yep.
Right, because it's a 5-mana effect that enters a battlefield and kills a creature, and every now and then you can make this bigger. I don't know how often that happens, but sure, you can do something like that. But if you're paying 6 mana for this, it's not that strong, right? Like, 6 mana for sorcery speed, 4/3 vehicle that kills something. That's not the strongest thing.
That's just okay.
Yeah, that's just all right. But then you get to, like, if you're playing this in a blue-black artifact deck where you can play this for 4 mana,
3-4 mana, yeah.
3-4 mana, then you're talking. So I feel like in a blue-black deck, this card is very, very strong, probably close to an A-level card. Definitely. If you can play it for affinity. And I've seen people just pop off with blue-black artifact decks, so I've seen it. It is not hard to have 3-4 artifacts in play. And you play this, and all of a sudden you just have a big vehicle, and then you can just, sacrifice something or kill one of your small things and turn this big. So I think it's good there. But in a lot of other decks, it's probably worse. One other tangent, by the way, why are there so many effects like this? I feel like there's like 5 enter the battlefield, vehicle, kill something effects.
I don't know.
There's the blue one that steals something.
Yeah.
There's the Golgari uncommon that kills a 4-drop or less. There's the detention chariot, which is the white version of this. And then there's this. There's like 4 vehicles that all do the same thing.
I mean, I know why. It's because of the design space. Like, if you view it as, here's a Oblivion ring where it just comes in and kills a thing, that's it. And then you ratchet it up to, here's a creature that comes in and kills another thing. That's too good, right? Like, those cards are too good. If you think of a vehicle as like being half a creature, it's a creature sometimes. Right. Well, now all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, we'll put some ETB, blow up some other stuff on a card that's sometimes a creature and sometimes not. But yeah, they did go kind of nuts this time. That's a good point, Paul.
So I would say like in a blue-black artifact deck where you're very heavy artifacts, 10 to 12 artifacts, something along those lines. This is probably an A-level card.
Build around A.
Build around A. And then in most decks, you'll probably play it.
I would.
You would, but it can be maybe a C-level card in certain decks where if you don't have a lot of artifacts and you're just looking to play this as a 6-mana vehicle that ETBs and kills something, it's a little bit slow, but format's not super fast. It'll be fine inclusion in those decks.
Yeah, in the decks it's built around though, that is dumb.
Oh yeah,
I mean that is dumb.
Absolutely.
All right, red is our last base color here. We've got a few gold cards after this too, and a couple of lands. Burnout Bastronaut is first up. It is red for a 1/1 Goblin Warrior at rare. It's got Menace, and it has Start Your Engines, and it has an activated ability of 2 mana. This creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So that's a nice little bonus. And then it has max speed. Ooh, this creature gets double strike with max speed. This is the best Start Your Engines card we've seen.
Oh yeah.
Enabler,
you play this
enabler.
You play this thing on turn 1 and it will not be very long before you just have maximum speed. This thing has Menace too. So you just can't even block it until turn 3 probably in most instances. So you're going to be able to get in a couple of times. And it also has kind of that pump effect too, which is not very efficient, right? You're paying 2 mana to pump it, but it's still just something. And then once you get to maximum speed, having a Menace creature that does have double strike that fire breathes for 2 mana, it gives you a pretty good amount of value.
It does
for the mana investment. So if you're looking to be a red-white aggressive Start Your Engines deck, yeah, I'd be pretty happy with Burnout Bastronaut in my deck to get things going.
Yeah, I mean, if I built around it in Start Your Engines, I would have it at B+. If I didn't, I would still have it at like a B or a B- or something. I mean, this card's just powerful in and of itself. A good thing to do on turn 1. The pump ability is good even if you never get to double strike. It is inefficient, but it allows you to trade up for a 2 toughness creature at some point in the game. These are all good things, but I gotta say, man, if I'm playing like some slow deck and my opponent goes, oh, cool, I won the die roll. Okay, Mountain Burnout Bastronaut. I'm like, oh no. Like, this is the scariest thing you could see. Like, even if you kill it, they already started their engines.
Right. I mean, at that point, you're just like, all right, we're just going to be playing a game where my opponent has max speed, and hopefully, at the very least, we've seen that max speed isn't too insane.
No,
it gives kind of marginal upgrades, which I like, because with cards like this, you can imagine getting to maximum speed is not the most difficult thing in the world. In fact, it feels like an inevitability a lot of the time.
It's too easy
at some point you kind of get there. Like I said, I kind of compare it to Threshold, where you play a deck that just has spells and some self-mill. You just kind of get to Threshold at some point. And I feel like max speed is similar, where you just play a game of Magic, and a lot of the time you'll be able to hit max speed.
Right. And I like mechanics like that, like cards that reward you for drawing cards or playing lands or attacking your opponent. These are all things that are part of the natural flow of a game. In fact, they just happen, and giving you smaller incremental bonuses for doing that, I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, I actually really love the max speed game that you play with your opponents, because it's really interesting. Sometimes you make trades that you don't want to, just to kind of prevent them from leveling up their creature. You know, let's say you have a 3/2 and they have a 2/2 in play, but they're at max speed 2, and you see a good payoff. You're just like, well, I'm just going to trade my 3/2 for their 2/2. Just because I just don't want them to get to that next level. So it does add another layer, which I think is pretty interesting when both players are trying to kind of leverage their board and get to a spot where they're trying to get to maximum speed.
Yeah. Yeah, that is cool. Next is Draconautics Engineer. This is 1 and a red for a 2/2 Goblin Artificer at rare. It has Exhaust. You can pay a red. Other creatures you control gain haste until end of turn. Put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. It also has a different exhaust ability. And by the way, the reminder text on this one actually is specific. It says activate each exhaust ability only once. So you do get to do both. The other exhaust ability is 3 and a red. Create a 4/4 red dinosaur dragon token creature with flying. What?
This card's ridiculous. It's a 2-drop that on turn 3, you can play this as a 3/3 haster, right?
Yeah.
Or on turn 4, you can then attack. You can then make a 4/4 flyer. Or if you're afraid this thing's gonna die, on turn 6 you play this, and it's a 2/2 that makes a 4/4 flyer. Or on turn 7 you play this, you make a 4/4 flyer. Then you give everything haste, and you put a +1/+1 counter on this. There's so many different modes of this card, and everything is awesome. It's amazing on turn 2. It's amazing in the late game. It makes you a big evasive flyer. If you have mana, you can also just use this to haste other things and kill your opponents or deal a bunch of damage out of nowhere. There's just no downside to this card. This card is excellent.
Yeah. I mean, I think I like just A for Draconautics Engineer. Yeah, this is just so asks nothing of you and gives you so much. That's incredible. Right. Next is Hazaret Godseeker. This is 1 and a red for a 5/3 for 2 mana legendary creature god. This is a mythic rare. It's got indestructible and haste and start your engines. It also has an activated ability, 1 tap, target creature with power 2 or less can't be blocked this turn. But this is a Hazaret, so it has to have a downside. We cannot have a 2 mana 5/3 indestructible haste, and it does. So
really?
It says, yeah, Hazaret can't attack or block unless you have max speed.
Yeah, so that is a pretty big downside, right? It's going to take a while to kind of get this going, so it's kind of hard to. If it basically don't really treat this as a 2-drop, right? You're very rarely playing this on turn 2. You just kind of play this at some point when you can. But in most instances, you'd rather play an actual creature that can attack or block in the early phases of the game. But it does help you get to max speed, right? You play other things. It helps you get to max speed. You make your things. It makes your things. It gives your creatures evasion. And then at some point, you will be able to turn this on. And then you have a 5/3 indestructible creature, which is a very big problem to deal with. But noting that it is not a creature, and it's not a creature for some time. So it's weird because it costs 2 mana, but it's not really a 2-drop, right? It's like a 4-drop, a 5-drop.
I think it's interesting because it is a creature, right? And what I mean by that is like, that does allow you to crew. You can crew basically anything with this. 2 mana crew anything is kind of interesting. Also, there's a play pattern that you could see coming together very easily, which is you play a normal 2-drop on 2, and then on 3 you play Hazaret and then activate it because it does have haste, and you can now make the 2-drop that you played unblockable, and you start your engines and get to level 2 straight away. You're halfway home. If you ever do get to max speed, this thing's really annoying. A 5/3 indestructible is just like, what are they supposed to do with that? Like, you can just keep turning it sideways and they have to do something. And if you aren't in a position to attack, this is like the best blocker, or one of the best blockers on the ground you could have. High toughness high power indestructible blocker is just a nightmare for the opponent.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's certainly,
you're right. It doesn't do enough until it does too much.
Yeah. Yeah. That's certainly the upside of the card. But at the same time, if you treat this as kind of, treat it like an enchantment or something, right? Where it comes into play, it doesn't impact the board really at all. And then let's say you're on the draw and you have this. Like, what are you doing with this card? It's just kind of sitting in your hand. Right. You can't really ever play it if you're trying to kind of keep pace with what your opponents are playing on curve. So the ceiling is you're on the play and you get this and you play this on turn 3 and you get some damage through, and then you can turn this on quickly, because I think the goal with Hazaret is getting to max speed as quickly as possible, because you want to turn this into a creature.
Definitely.
But then there's just going to be plenty of instances where you're on the draw, you're on the back foot, you don't know when you're really going to be able to play this card, and then it's going to be sitting there or it's going to be in play, not having a great impact on the board. And you're just kind of hoping to be able to get to max speed with this card at some point. Now, this card is still great, I will say, as something you play late. Like, even if you play this turn 5, right, that's just you play all your other creatures, you're getting to max speed, and turn 5, you just play this at max speed. You have a 2 mana 5/3 indestructible haste creature. Totally. Right. That's just great.
That is the dream, is to enable Hazaret Godseeker without having to play it.
Right. Exactly.
And then play it on a double spell turn. Get out of here.
Like you get the out, which obviously, as you outlined, you can play it on turn 3. But I think for the most part, you'd rather just play some other creature that starts your engines rather than play the Hazoret. And that's kind of how you want to look at this card. And then on turn 5 or 4, turn 5 maybe, you have max speed. You're like, creature Hazoret attack you.
Totally.
You're just like, oh my gosh.
Or you're like Oblivion Ring Hazoret. I mean, just like kill your thing, play this. I mean, this is overwhelming stuff. Definitely difficult to grade this card.
Yeah, I mean, if you are aggressive, this is still something that looks to be. It has a high ceiling. The upside is very high, but obviously there are also instances where it sits in your hand and doesn't do enough. So I think it's probably somewhere in the B range.
I do too.
But is it just a hard B or is it a B minus?
I think it's
is it a B plus?
I think it's a B. I mean, I think it's a build around B plus. Like if you make sure that you're trying to do super aggressive stuff, max speed, basically maximizing for getting to max speed. But, I think in a normal curve out red with another color type deck, I think it's a B. I think there's going to be some games where your opponent has a few well-timed removal spells, or you don't draw a different start your engines card, and it just doesn't do that much. That's a very real downside. I will note that there are more ways to deal with Hazoret in this format than others. Oh. Because the blue enchantment just taps it, right? It just taps it and turns off all abilities. The white effect, it exiles target creature or vehicle. The black effect also, I believe, the murder, I believe that exiles as well. Oh, and then, no way.
And then the 5-mana common removal spell gives -6/-6. So
okay, spin out is just destroy target creature.
Destroy? Okay,
yeah,
never mind.
We get a little bit back for Hazoret, but still all the other ones, that adds up a lot. That actually makes me want to change the grade a little bit.
Yeah, it's not. There are some formats where this thing just doesn't die.
Right.
It's like there's just all destroy effects, but it does feel to me that there's enough where you have outs to this, even when it's turned on. It's still very good, but there are outs to possibly dealing with this creature.
Okay, I'm going to go B- for Hazoret Godseeker with that information because that is tough.
Yeah.
All right, this is a test, Paul. Next card is called Count on Luck, which you probably shouldn't do if you want to get good at anything. It costs triple red and it's an enchantment. What does this thing need to do?
5 damage to all your opponent's creatures?
What
I don't know.
grade would we need to give this for you? Yeah, like a one-sided wrath or draw 5 or something. I mean,
it would need to affect the board in a pretty massive way. Let's say it was, I would say like deal 5 damage divided how you choose amongst your opponent's creatures. Something like that but the thing is you have to be mono red to play Count on Luck. It's red, enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. We had a card like this that was 3 in a red, and that card ended up playing out pretty poorly. Very poorly. Right? Because also, there's going to be enough instances where you just hit something big and you can't even cast it. Totally. This is not the same as drawing a card every single turn.
Yeah.
And it's almost impossible to cast.
Right. And that was my setup there, right? You need it to be immediate and powerful for this mana cost, and this does not meet that bar. So I would say F for Count on Luck.
I would also say F. Even in a mono red deck, it's playable in a mono red deck. You would
put it in there as a C or whatever, but
if you're playing a 2-color deck, just don't even try.
It. Next is Gastel Thrill Roller. This is 2 in a red for a 4/2 artifact vehicle at rare. It's got trample and haste with a crew cost of 2. And it says when this vehicle enters, it becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. So first one's free. And then it says 2 in a red, discard a card. So that's the cost. Return this card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it at sorcery speed. No conditions on that, though. You just have to pay the cost, which is 2 in red, and discard a card to get it back. That's pretty good, actually.
Yeah, it's kind of doing a ball lightning impression type thing where it's like it comes into play. If you're aggressive, the turn you play it, you can hit your opponent, likely trade, right? Or you don't, and then you just had this 4/2 trampling haste with crew. 4/2 trample haste is also pretty nice size where if they choose not to block it, then if you have started your engines, you can kind of trample over for some damage as well.
Yeah, even if they do block it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then of course, if a trade happens, you can then just basically play it again and discard a land or whatever, and then just have this be something that can continue chipping away. Now, this is the type of card that you have to be very, very aggressive to want to play a card like this. But in that type of deck, this card hits pretty hard, and it comes back. It gives you a little bit of extra value. Now, 3 mana for 4/2 isn't the best stats, but it's the trample and haste in addition to the general strategy of red-white, which is looking to beat down, which makes this card pretty interesting. It is a vehicle, though, right?
Yeah.
So you get the one shot, but then afterwards you still do have to crew it, and it's just power and toughness. So I don't think this card is insane by any stretch, but I would put it in my aggressive red-white deck.
Definitely. I view this as a start your engines enabler. Like, it doesn't actually start your own engines, but if at any point you have, this is probably going to bump you up one notch. You're perfectly willing to trade this off for basically anything on the other side of the battlefield. A 2-drop, sure. Block, take a couple damage, you lose the thing. You just need to be quite aggressive. That said, I mean, it's just a vehicle. It's a 4/2. Like, you can block with it if you can crew it up, whatever. Like, it doesn't just die or anything like that. Like, it is just a permanent that hits the battlefield. So that said, aggressive deck, I like it at the B- level. Regular deck, C- probably. Like, it's pretty bad if you're not able to turn it sideways, or if you don't care about getting the free crew on the first one.
Yeah, I think I'd have Gastel Thrill Roller at around a C+ range. It's a little bit above the curve for what you would want in, most like red decks tend to be aggressive, right? And you kind of put this in your deck, but there are also instances where this is going to look kind of mediocre too. Yeah. So, but I think there's enough here where I like it at C+.
Okay. Next is Howl Squad Heavy. This is 2 and a red for a 2/3 Goblin Mercenary at rare. It has start your engines. It also gives your other goblins haste. And it says, at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token that attacks this combat if able. And it can because it has haste. And it has max speed. You can tap the heavy to add red for each goblin you control.
Okay, so
not a lot to dislike here.
Right. It's another like Goblin Rabble Master variant, right? It's just like a 3-mana creature that does make a token every turn. The nice thing about this format, because part of the downside of this is if they have a 2/2, they can just block your token and eat it. Mm-hmm. But the nice thing about this specifically is we're in a format where there's a bunch of vehicles. Mm-hmm. So as long as you set your stop on your combat step, you make the token, then you use your tokens to crew your vehicle. And then you attack with the vehicle, and boom, you just have a 3-drop that just makes you a token every turn. And you don't lose it because that token just has to attack that turn, right?
That's right.
It's like that token. So for when you play it, if you can crew it up and have it survive on the following turn, that is just a 1/1 that you can do whatever you want with it. So this card works really, really nicely with vehicles. And even without vehicles, it's just a good card, right? If you're on the play and you play this 3 mana 2/3, if they don't have a creature, you just kind of win the game.
Right.
You just
you're always
you get the
ahead.
1/1 in. Right. And then the next one, you have another 1/1. And then if you have some kind of a trick or anything or a vehicle, you're just totally fine. So this card's really, really solid in basically any deck. And the question is, do you want to give this an A or an A-?
I would give it an A-, but it might just be an A.
Yeah.
It's
I think
awesome.
that the fact that there are vehicles puts it over the top, whereas in other formats, you would lose your token often. But here you just play kind of anything with crew 1 or crew 2. And remember, you can over crew. So you can crew this plus the 1/1 you make on a crew 2 if you want, I think. And then you're set. So then you just get to keep your token. So
you cannot under crew, however.
That would be cheating.
Partial payments not accepted. Next is the Boom Mobile. This is 2 red for a 5/5 vehicle at rare. It says when this vehicle enters, add 4 mana of any one color. Spend this mana only to activate abilities. And this actually does have an activated ability. Its exhaust is 2 red X. This vehicle deals X damage to any target. Put a +1/+1 counter on this vehicle. And then the crew cost is 2. So this is free If
free
you
damage, free. Yeah, it's everything that you think it is. It's ridiculous. It's a 4-mana 5/5 vehicle with crew 2, which is all right, but it adds you 4 mana. So even on turn 4, you play it, and if your opponent has like a Thopter or something in play, you get to kill the Thopter. You deal 1 damage to the Thopter because you have the 4 mana, and this becomes a 6/6.
Wow.
So this will always be kind of a 4 mana 6/6. But remember, if you play this later, you play this on turn 5 or you play this on turn 6. It's like all those other vehicles that we've seen previously where they enter the battlefield and they kill something.
Wow.
So this is a card that you can use to kill something, and this grows. And then if you feel like you want to kill something bigger and you want more mana, and let's say you have a different exhaust creature in play, you play this, you just exhaust your other creature, and then at a later turn, you can exhaust this when you want, if you want to find a different creature that you want to kill, to spend red 2 and an X to kill something else bigger. This card's fantastic at basically all points of the game. Maybe at turn 4, it's technically at its worst because they might not have a 1 toughness creature.
I mean, you
but
can
even
hit
on
them.
turn 5, right? You can, but even on turn 5, like they're probably going to have a 2 toughness creature in play, and then we're looking at a creature that kills a 2-drop and gives you a 6/6 vehicle as well on top of that. This card is excellent. I think Boommobile is an A.
Yeah, it looks like an A to me. That's huge and kills
Gives you
something
mana.
small-ish. Yeah, that's crazy. And if you can leverage that, like you said, to use the exhaustibility of something else, I mean, geez, you're really going off.
Right, because you can just use this to just fire. You use the exhaust of something else, and then in the really late game, you can even just use this to kill your opponent.
Totally.
Right, you're like 7 mana, deal 4 damage to you, finish you off. So
right.
this
and
is just
by the way, I'm
good
attacking you with
always.
this huge thing. Yeah.
Right.
Next is Chandra Spark Hunter. This is 3 and a red for a 4 loyalty legendary planeswalker Chandra at Mythic Rare. She's got a static ability. At the beginning of combat on your turn, choose up to 1 target vehicle you control. Until end of turn, it becomes an artifact creature and gains haste. So it crews the vehicle for free every turn and even gives haste in case you just cast it. So that's pretty nice. 3 activated abilities plus 2 loyalty. You may sacrifice an artifact or discard a card. If you do, draw a card. Okay. 0, create a 3/2 colorless vehicle artifact token with crew 1, similar to the other card we saw, the blue one or whatever it was. And then -7. So there is an ultimate here. It is in range. Like 4 loyalty goes up to 6. The turn that Chandra hits, next turn up to 8, and then -7 even still keeps Chandra around. What do you get? You get an emblem with whenever an artifact you control enters, this emblem deals 3 damage to any target.
Yeah, and
Wow.
Chandra pumps out an artifact every turn.
Yes.
Right. So if you can get it to the point where, let's say you play the Chandra and you tick it up a couple times and just use it to rummage, right? It's got a lot of loyalty for 4 mana. You play this and you rummage and she's at 6.
That's huge.
And then you do, yeah. And then, so it is not too hard to be able to emblem with this. And then once you do, every turn, she basically makes a vehicle and lightning bolts something.
Yeah, that's crazy. See, that's a really harsh combo, because if you play this on 4 and plus, you're at 6 loyalty, and your opponent's almost never going to be able to just like outright kill Chandra from that point. So they have to make the decision on, do I play the game where I'm trying to chip away at Chandra's loyalty, or am I going to just try to attack you and ignore it? And the question then becomes, what happens from the opponent's perspective? What happens if I choose to ignore Chandra? And the answer is you lose. Like, this ultimate will definitely kill you. So your opponent doesn't really have a choice. They have to send 3 damage over to Chandra, and it's just like you're not actually killing Chandra at that point. So plus, man, this is 3 and a red. Like, dang, I would have bet that this is 2 double red.
Yeah, she's just easy to cast, and if you're ahead on board, she'll also snowball those games, right? You play this on turn 4 on the play, and they're on the defensive. You just make a vehicle and then hit them with a 3/2 haster. What are they going to do?
Right.
And crew it up. But then even if you're on the defensive, like, you can still make a creature with Chandra, right? And if you have another creature in play, you can just chump and trade with these vehicles, right? And you just keep spitting them out every single turn. And every turn you can either just continue to tick up the loyalty to get to that emblem, or just make a bunch of vehicles and then use those vehicles to chump with whatever your opponents are playing. So she just feels like there's just so much here. and every mode is just good and valuable. And she's a planeswalkers, and planeswalkers are hard to kill. Chandra is an A.
It's an A. That is a legit planeswalker right there. I'm really surprised about the single red mana there.
Yes.
Next is Duretti, Rocketeer Engineer. This is 4 and a red for a star 5 legendary Goblin Artificer at rare. Duretti's power is equal to the greatest mana value among artifacts you control. And whenever Duretti enters or attacks, choose target artifact card in your graveyard. You may sacrifice an artifact. If you do, return the chosen card to the battlefield.
Okay, so Duretti in a lot of instances will be like a 5 mana 4/5. You're kind of hoping that there's a 4 mana artifact in play, something along those lines, but you don't exactly know. And there's a setup cost for this. It's a pretty big one too. Like the turn you play it, you're kind of hoping that you've cycled away a big artifact, and then you have something else in play,
right? And
then you kind of swap them and get them into play. And this would be really interesting if it wasn't red. I feel like
needs to be black.
This is the
or
type
green.
of card, like something in the Abzan colors, where those are the colors that have kind of various reanimation effects, and that's kind of what you want to be looking for here. So it's kind of awkward that it's in red. I get it; it's Duretti. So for that reason, I just don't think this effect happens all that often, and it takes a lot of setup to actually get pretty good payoff. Now, yes, there are going to be games. This is another one of those. Trophy picture type scenarios where you're like, I cycled the detention chariot.
Yeah.
And then I had another artifact in play, and then I sacrificed it to get the chariot into play, and boom, I did it. But if you don't, then this is a 5 mana something 5.
Yeah.
And that something is usually not going to be greater than 5 power. So you're looking at a 5 mana 3/5, and that's just not something that's that interesting. So this is probably a D level card.
Yeah. What would you give it if you built around it on some level? Like, what's its ceiling, I guess? Like a B?
Ceiling? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you would need, I'm trying to imagine the types of decks that want this. Maybe there's the blue-red deck certainly does a lot of rummaging as well, right? So maybe this fits into a blue-red shell or a red-black shell that's doing some self-mill. And then you need to have one of those articles or artifacts or vehicles that come into play and kill something. You need one of those effects to really have this really pop off. So I build around like B minus,
B or something. And that we're talking about the ceiling, right? I mean, this card's really not very good. This is a case study in setup cost. It is extremely high for Duretti to do anything. Last red card is called Full Throttle. It's 4 red for a sorcery at rare. And it says, after this main phase, there are 2 additional combat phases. At the beginning of each combat this turn, untap all creatures that attack this turn. This is kind of like the ultimate win more style card, right? If you had a good attack, you may be able to do it again and again.
Yeah, but the thing is, this doesn't give you any combat stats. This is like the worst overrun ever. You already need to have a winning board position so that you can attack with your bigger creatures twice.
Exactly.
Right? That's what this card is. It doesn't give first strike. It doesn't give anything. This isn't March of the World. This isn't the ooze card. This is much, much worse than that.
Much worse.
I wish this gave you something, but it gives you just more attack steps. And how many times is just another 6 mana 6/6 going to be better than this? I bet the 6 mana 6/6 is just better.
Way better.
In most instances. I think Full Throttle is just an F.
It's an F. I would take my foot off the pedal for that one. Okay, that moves us to gold, where it looks like we get a pair of gold cards per color pair. First one up is called Mendicant Core Guidelight. This is blue-white for a star 3 legendary artifact creature robot at rare. And it says its power is equal to the number of artifacts you control and does count itself. It has start your engines and max speed. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, you may pay 1. If you do, copy it. Comes in as a token if you do that. That's sweet.
Yeah, so you just play any other artifact, creature, or vehicle. You just spend an extra mana. You have to kill this thing.
Have to kill
If you
it.
don't, if you don't kill this thing and you're playing against a blue-white deck, you better believe they're going to have some kind of artifact to play. And this thing is just costed really aggressively. We're talking about a 2-mana 1/3 that in a blue-white deck, this is just going to be a 4/3 in a lot of instances. 3/3, 4/3. It starts your engines really early, and it combos really, really well with the Signpost uncommon in the set, Guidelight Pathmaker, which is the 6-mana artifact, which if you get a 2-drop or less, or it might be 3-drop, if you get a 2-drop or less, you get to put that artifact into play. So you play that 6-mana vehicle, and you search for Mendicant Core, and you put that straight into play, and you're just getting a ton of value that way. I think this card is awesome. You know, it's in the blue-white decks. You're gonna be wanting to do the artifact thing, and if you don't kill this thing, it will just completely run away with the game.
Yeah, I mean, it is a specific card. It's a gold card, and it needs artifacts. But I mean, in that context, A minus.
I guess A minus. It could be an A, but I'll give it an A. Look, when you get to max speed and you start copying things, the game's just over.
Game's over,
right? And it's a great
and there's
body.
no downside to the card whatsoever. Like
none.
It just gives and gives. Next is Riptide Gearhulk. This one has a tough mana cost. It's 1 white, blue, but it is a 2/5 double strike. That's also an artifact creature construct. It's the mythic rare of the pair, and it says, when this creature enters, for each opponent, put up to 1 target non-land permanent that player controls into its owner's library, 3rd from the top. Are you kidding me?
This is just the ultimate.
Oh, and it has prowess. If I didn't say that,
yeah, it's not a mana war. It's like trip up on a stick, right? It's a Teferi ability on a stick on a 5-mana 2/5 double striking creature with prowess. That's already pretty solid stats for what you're getting. And not only that, it's basically just an enter the battlefield, kill target creature type effect.
It is. And it has prowess, so it's extra scary.
Yeah. So, I mean, the only knock on this is just the fact that it's kind of hard to cast.
Yeah.
But the question is how much. The thing is, even if this costs 6 mana, this would be a good card.
Definitely.
So, and you do have the chance to take this. Now, if I have a card like Riptide Gearhulk in my deck, then I would definitely keep a bigger lookout for the blue-white dual land, right? Just to make sure that I can cast this. But as far, just in terms of sheer power level, this looks like an A-level power level card.
Yeah.
But just noting that it's hard to cast.
It's an A trending towards A+. Maybe the mana cost holds it back from being an A+. But I mean, this is the type of card that stabilizes basically any board.
You can search for this with Transit Mage too, which is
nice.
Insane.
That's crazy. Next is Winter Cursed Rider. This is blue-black for a 3/2 legendary human warlock at rare. It has Ward, pay 2 life. So annoying, but not, it usually doesn't prevent your opponent from actually doing it. It also gives artifacts you control Ward, pay 2 life. And it has Exhaust. You can pay 2 blue-black, tap it, and exile X artifact cards from your graveyard to give each other non-artifact creature -X until end of turn. That's a lot.
That is, I mean, I guess they just want to make all of these legendary creatures they give you so much, right? Mendicant Core was a 2-drop that gave you all of that, and now we're looking at a 2-mana 3/2 that gives basically all your things Ward 2 in blue-black. Most of your things are going to be artifacts. And then you also just have the ability to occasionally just sweep the board, right? And you don't have to use that ability, but it's still just there. And I had the misfortune of being playing against this card, and my opponent just played this. I had to and just was able to actually use that ability. If you play this and you play against a green-white deck that has no artifacts, right? All your creatures live, and then you just exile 2 artifacts. And all of a sudden, you get to -2/-2. Now, there are matchups where that doesn't do anything, right? Like, let's say you play the mirror.
Yeah.
But in most matchups, they're gonna be maybe half artifacts, or you're gonna be able to leverage this the way that you want already on a body that just gives you, good stats and a pretty annoying ability to boot. I think this card is really solid. I don't think it's quite as good as Mendicant Core. I feel like Mendicant Core works better with all the synergies that you have, but this is still probably like a B+ in a blue-black artifact deck.
Same. Yeah. B+ for Winter Cursed Rider. Next is Oil Deep Gearhulk. Another tough mana cost. This is blue, black. It is a 4/4 artifact creature construct at Mythic Rare. It has lifelink. It also has Ward 1, which is nice. Like Ward 1 is way better than Ward Pay 2 life in most scenarios. Like that is annoying. And it says when this creature enters, look at target player's hand. You may choose a card from it. If you do, that player discards that card, then draws a card. So they get the card back.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a Vendilion click effect that we've seen in the past. That you take a card, but they draw another card. Now, since you're in most instances, you're taking the best card out of their hand, right? It's still going to be
with random.
It's going to be good for you, but it's certainly not just a discard effect because they can obviously just draw another good card on top of that. Noting that this is a May ability, so you don't have if you're like, oh, your hand's kind of mediocre, I don't want to give you the chance of drawing something better. You can also choose to do nothing. But that by itself is not great. But that on top of a 4/4 lifelinker with Ward, that's pretty strong.
That's pretty
right.
strong.
Just the stats on this card alone would be something that you would probably be interested in just playing blue, black back for a 4/4 lifelinking creature with Ward 1 that also basically gets to take the best card out of their opponent's hand. Obviously, it gets replaced by something else. But artifact creature, I'm happy playing this in my blue-black decks. Oil Deep Gearhulk gets a B+.
A B+. It's an A- except for the fact that it's blue, black. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And
the power level is there, but you can't play. You're going to play this on turn 5 a lot.
Right, and it's still good.
Yeah.
And you get to look at your opponent's hand no matter what. Whether you choose to mess with it or not, you still get to see what's up. Next is Far Fortune Boss. This is 2 black-red for a 4/5 legendary human mercenary at rare. And it says start your engines. And whenever you attack, Far Fortune deals 1 damage to each opponent. Well, you want to get your engine running. That's a way to do it. And it has max speed. If a source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage +1 instead. Wow. Wow. 5 toughness too.
Yeah, I mean, this is a 4 mana for a 4/5 with start your engines. And then the turn you play this, if you just attack, all of a sudden, even if your creature gets blocked, since you ping them, you basically get to, I don't even know what the term is, but you get to speed 2. You get to increase your speed to 2 right away, right? And so it is really, really trivial to get to maximum speed with Far Fortune in play. And once you do, this payoff is really strong. Because then every time you attack, you deal 2 damage to your opponent, and all your creatures effectively have an additional point of power. Right. And on a creature that's already just really, really well statted. So I like Far Fortune a lot. It's probably like what? Is it an A? It's in the A territory. I'm just wondering if I should give this an A- or an A.
I think I would just give it an A.
Yeah.
It just fits in this strategy. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Just on rate, it gets you to max speed right away. And when you do, all of a sudden combat just becomes impossible.
Definitely.
Yeah. This card is just really strong.
Really, really good. Next is Colstoke Gearhulk. This is 1 red, black for a 5/4 artifact creature construct at Mythic Rare with Menace and Death Touch. A weird combo whenever they put those together, but whatever, you'll take it. It says when this creature enters, put target creature card with mana value 4 or less from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control with a finality counter on it. That creature gains Menace, Death Touch, and Haste. And at the beginning of your next end step, exile that creature. Dang.
So
these cards are scary, man.
Yeah, they're scary. This one's interesting just because you don't get to keep the creature,
no.
Right? So you play this, you reanimate something, and then presumably they're not going to want to block this thing, right? Because it has Menace and Death Touch. So it's a nice way to just get in for a good chunk of damage. So I think in a lot of instances, you have to kind of treat this as, hey, it's a 5 mana 5/4, but then you get to reanimate, let's say...
Whatever the best thing is.
Whatever. Let's say a creature with 4 power. And that just means this probably is going to be a 5 mana 5/4 Menace Death Touch that enters a battlefield, and in a lot of instances will basically deal an extra 3 or 4 damage to your opponent. Right?
Pretty strong, man. That's pretty good.
That is pretty good. Also, if you're behind on board, I guess you technically don't have to attack, and it gives you a little bit of time. But you most of the time you want to be using this to be kind of more aggressive in attack.
I will say though, Paul, I feel like Far Fortune End Boss is just a better card.
Oh yeah, no, this is not.
But
on
it's
that same
cheaper, less rarity, easier to cast. Like, maybe I'm underselling the Coldstoke Gearhulk a little bit.
No, I've had my opponent play this against me, and it was just okay. I actually think just because, look, when you play this, it's kind of like a 5-drop that deals some damage to your opponent. If your opponents really don't want to take the damage, they can double block, but that's obviously a really, really bad exchange for them. And so, yeah, I do agree with you. It's not on Far Fortune's level. I'm just curious if it's even potentially on the level as the other Gearhulks, right? Like how much
feels
better
on the
is
weaker
this?
side.
Yeah, like how much better is this than Oil Deep Gearhulk? It's probably similar-ish, but it's definitely worse than Riptide Gearhulk.
It's definitely
which just kills
worse
a
than
creature full
Riptide,
stop.
and I think it's worse than Oil Deep, but not by a lot. But it's
Yeah. So I think for that reason, it's probably in the B plus range.
I would give it a B plus, but it's really hard to cast.
It is hard to cast. Now you're still getting a pretty decent sized body.
Definitely,
right? It's a 5-mana 5/4 with the combination of Menace and Death Touch is actually very strong because it has to. Once you double block it, like it will 100% eat 2 creatures, which is nice.
Yeah,
so,
but you also have a 5 power. Whatever. Yeah. I would say B plus for Coldstoke Gearhulk. A little disappointed in it, to be honest. Like, if I can get what is, I believe, just a better Magic card for 1 less mana plus way easier to cast in the same color pair, that's a little weird. Next is Redshift Rocketeer Chief. This is green-red for a 2/3 legendary goblin pilot at rare. It's got vigilance, and it taps to add X mana of any one color, where X is Redshift's power, but you can only spend the mana to activate abilities, and it has one. It has Exhaust, 10 red-green. So you just dump a little 12 mana in there, and it says put any number of permanent cards from your hand onto the battlefield.
Yeah.
That's
so I
like
believe
the worst
that mode
exhaust
is just
I've ever seen in my life.
So that mode is probably not going to happen all that often, but this is just kind of
That's
it's
an
weird.
understatement.
It almost feels like a signpost uncommon, right? In the sense where it's a nice cheap creature, but you're just kind of doing the exhausting, and then you play this, and it's a nice source of mana for specifically just exhaust abilities on a decent creature. I mean, 2 mana, 2/3 vigilance is also very, very solid, but I don't know how insane this is relative to maybe, for example, some of the other Gruul signpost uncommons that we've seen, right? We've seen the 2 mana 3/2 that exhausts into a 4/3 that makes a treasure when it attacks, and then there's a 3 mana card that basically does the same thing and makes your exhaust abilities cost 2 less.
Right.
And then that one also has its own exhaust ability to basically put counters on it and give trample to your team. So Redshift is good, certainly good. I mean, 2 mana for 2/3 vigilance with upside, but I don't think it stacks
but the
up
exhaust
to
ability is effectively a 0. I mean, you would have just cast your stuff if you had 12 mana available. I mean, I'm looking at like a B, maybe a B minus. Like, this is not, I'm not jumping out of my seat about Redshift, especially at the rare slot.
Yeah, I would give Redshift a B. I mean, look, 2 mana for a 2/3 vigilance is always just going to be something you play every single time.
Yeah.
And in red-green, you're going to be able to use this ability a good number of the time, right? Just because you're going to be the exhaust deck. So, and that's nice. Being able to get 2 mana from your 2-drop is pretty solid on a creature that has decent stats as well. You can attack with this, then use the mana to
exhaust. And exhaust is instant speed too, so it actually really matters too. All right, so B for Redshift Rocketeer Chief. Next is Pyrewood Gearhulk. This is 2 red, green. This one is a 7/7 artifact creature construct at Mythic Rare with Vigilance and Menace. That's nice. And when this creature enters, other creatures you control get +2/+2 and gain Vigilance and Menace until end of turn. And then they just throw on the rider damage can't be prevented this turn as well, which is going to get somebody, in some weird edge case. But this is a 6 mana 7/7 Vigilance Menace that has a fairly major impact the turn it comes in if you have any type of board state.
Yeah, this is just like one of the best overrun variants you can get, right?
Yeah, it feels like it's almost a waste. Like you might just win the game the turn you cast.
Right, but then if you don't, you have a 7/7 Vigilance Menace creature left over, right?
Totally.
There is no downside to this. This is not just hey, I'm holding this forever and then I play the overrun to hopefully kill you. This is, if we have an even board state, you just play this card, you attack, they take a ton of damage, and you still have a creature that threatens to win the game after you play it. This card is just amazing.
It is. How do you feel about the mana cost? It's 6 mana, including double red, double green. But this is in green. Like, this is supposed to be the color pair that can actually do this.
Yeah, and not only that, I like when effects... So I like flashier effects that cost a little bit more, because when it's double red, double green, or double green, double white, like, you're not playing those cards on turn 4 that often anyways. So I'd rather just have them cost a little bit more and give me more bang for my buck, because you just don't know you're not gonna play them turn 4 anyways. In which case you're effectively treating these cards as 5-drops and 6-drops anyways. Yeah. So then give me 6-drop and 7-drop worth of mythic value out of these cards. And so I think this is one of the better variants that we've seen. This is very, very close to the level of the Riptide Gearhulk. Like, you play this card, and you're just going to win the game on the spot a lot. And if you don't, it's got Vigilance and Menace too. Yeah. He just plays offense and defense too.
Yeah, and 7
This
toughness.
is just the best version of, we've had good, at white, we've had sometimes really good commons where these angels come into play and give your team +1/+1 in Vigilance, and they end up playing really well. That's what gives you +2/+2 with Vigilance and Menace and just an awesome body. I think Pyrowood Gearhulk is the perfect top end creature to play. I think this is an A.
An A. I like A.
Yeah.
The only thing I don't like about it is just that you're going to win the game so often the turn you cast it that, like, any other design elements doesn't matter. Like, this maybe could have just been a sorcery,
right. If this was a 5-mana sorcery or something, you'd occasionally play an effect like that, maybe,
and just win on accident.
Add 1 mana and make a 7/7 Vigilance Menace creature.
Right, totally. And that's not a knock on the card. That's more just a I won. Wait, come back,
Right, exactly.
I played my bomb. Next is Bright Glass Gearhulk. This is green, white for a 4/4 artifact creature construct mythic rare. This one has First Strike and Trample. And when it enters, you may search your library for up to 2 artifact, creature, and or enchantment cards with mana value 1 or less, reveal them, put them into your hand, and then shuffle.
So ideally you have some targets for this, because you need to find cards that exactly have mana value 1. Now, there is the glider, the common. Yeah. The 1 mana mount, which you can play in green white's the mount deck. So that's probably the card that you're going to be getting most often. But if you have a Molt Tender, getting that's also pretty nice. And then this could be the scenario where you do convince yourself to play that 1 mana artifact that you pay 3, tap it, deal 3 damage or something, just because you need to have some targets.
Search, sure.
So if you can find a way to have even 1 target off of this and get that into play, I mean, this card's solid. Yeah. It's hard to cast, but you're getting a lot of value. 4 mana for a 4/4 First Striking Trampler is great. And if you can just at least pick up 1 creature off of this, you get a pretty good amount of value out of this card. I think this is like a B+.
I think
possibly
so too.
A-. If you can get 2 creatures off of this, it's probably like an A.
I mean, this type of card tends to really shine in Constructed, where you can just build like this sort of toolbox around it. But in Limited, you may be down to just 1 target or 2 targets, but the second one's kind of mediocre. If you had 2 good targets, if you have like a Basri in your deck or something stupid, then you get up into that A range pretty quick. As it sits, I would say the average use case for this is probably a B or a B+. It's hard to cast. It's not a devastating body, and you'll probably end up getting 1 thing that's decent or one thing that's decent plus one thing that's mediocre a lot of the time. But you are making your deck worse if you put like that artifact in or something like that, just as for a target. Still, B plus for Bright Glass Gearhulk. Card looks really strong, particularly if you can get it down early. Next is Caradora, Heart of Alacria. This is 2 green-white for a 4/2 legendary human knight at rare. It says, when Caradora enters, you may search your library for a mount or vehicle card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. And then it says, if one or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a creature or vehicle you control, that many +1 +1/+1 counters are put on it instead.
Yeah, so I don't know how often that ability happens. There are some ways to get +1/+1 counters on things, but there's not a ton. But obviously, anytime you can utilize that ability, it's great. But just full stop, like you're going to be a green-white deck. This is going to just get you a card every single time, right?
Just dig you up something sweet.
Yeah. When you're green-white, you're just going to have a mount or a vehicle. That's the mount vehicle combination. Yeah. So you will be able to get something, and sometimes that something's going to be something incredible, right? Sometimes you're going to be able to get a detention chariot off of this,
right?
And that's ridiculous. But even if you just get anything, this is just a 4-mana 4/2 that will draw you a card every single time, with the upside of getting you a potential bomb out of your deck if you do have a high-end mount or vehicle in your deck. And then of course that +1/+1 counter thing. There's probably some relevance there too. I'm sure there's some way. There's Lagarin, which is it's a green-white 1/1 flyer. When you saddle it and attack, you put a +1/+1 counter on up to 2 mounts or vehicles you control. So imagine you search for that, right? And then you get Lagarin in play, or you get Lagarin going, and then all of a sudden you just get +1/+1 counters all over the place. This card, I think, is just never going to be bad. It's going to be an excellent card in the green-white decks. Now, the body itself isn't very strong, but it's still fine. You still trade with something, and then you get an extra card on top of that. So these cards always play out very, very well, and I imagine this card's going to be pretty good. I think it's at least a B+.
I think it's a B+, A-. I mean, the way I view the body is it's good at crewing and it's good at trading, and you already got your value anyway. So,
right.
And then the +1/+1 counter stuff is mostly throwaway text until it's not, and then it's really important.
Yeah, I agree. It's like, I think the floor is a B+ if you just get any random thing.
Yeah.
And then if you have a bomb level mount or vehicle in your deck, it goes to like A- territory.
Exactly. Or just an A. Yeah.
Or an A, actually. Yeah.
Because you can crew up that vehicle or mount as well. Next is Zahur Glory's Past. This is white-black for a 3/2 legendary zombie cat warrior. This is rare. It has start your engines, and it has the activated ability, sacrifice another creature, surveil one, but you can only do it once each turn. And it has max speed. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, create a tapped 2/2 black zombie creature token.
Yeah, I mean, this creature is incredibly pushed.
That's the one you were talking about, right?
This is a 2-mana 3/2 with start your engines. Sign me up. It's got an ungated sacrifice effect. Oh, sorry, excuse me. You can only do it once each turn.
Mm-hmm. But it doesn't cost any mana.
Yeah, and the ability is awesome, right? If they just point the removal spell at anything else, you can sack it to surveil 1, which is great. And then once you get to maximum speed, you can just start sacrificing things to get zombies as well. And that just means they have to kill Zahur. If they don't kill Zahur, then just things get out of hand. All your removal spells just become much, much worse. And yeah, so I've played with this card. One time I had a weird deck where I just ended up splashing it, and it still ended up playing well in that deck. Imagine you just play this in a straight white-black deck, and this is just the perfect 2-drop for those decks. I just like everything that this card's trying to do. And so I think this card's like an A-.
Yeah. Pushed.
Yes.
And a good enabler for this deck. Next is Ketramos, the New Dawn. This is 1 black-white for a 4/4 legendary creature god. It's a mythic rare. And it says it has menace, lifelink, and indestructible. Remember, though, it's a god. Ketramos can't attack or block unless there are 7 or more cards. Oh, my God. In exile.
Yep.
Super threshold. Whenever 1 or more cards are put into exile from graveyards and or the battlefield during your turn, you draw a card and lose a life.
Yeah, I just feel like exiling 7 cards is going to be very difficult.
I mean, impossible?
Yeah,
Not literally, but I just mean like
it could just be impossible. Like how many? And it's weird that this isn't the black-white color pair. This feels like a green-black effect, where like you're milling yourself and you're exiling cards out of your graveyard. So this just feels really, really weird. And the only thing that I can look at this card is a 3-mana card that every time you exile something, you get to basically draw a card. And I feel like the setup cost here, you're just never going to turn this into an actual creature. And when you do, it's fine, but it's still not. I feel like to be able to meet the conditions of this, you want a much more impressive body than what you get out of this, right? This just feels like a card that should just, if you fulfill this condition, this thing needs to be insane.
Totally.
And it's just decent.
I
think this is an F. I really don't see, like, the reason you play this card is to try to draw a few cards off of this. But when you do, you're losing a life. You're not gaining a life.
No. And it's hard. It's really
hard to do.
And it's also somehow only on your turn.
Right.
I'm going to give an
F. You don't want this to ambush people, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll say F for Ketramos, and I'll put it in the prove it category. Like somebody show me how to make this thing sing, and then I'll jump ship and do it. Next is Fearless Swashbuckler. This is 1 blue-red for a 3/3 fish pirate at rare. It has haste. It also gives vehicles you control haste. And it says, whenever you attack, if a pirate and a vehicle attacked this combat, draw 3 cards, then discard 2 of them. Discard 2 cards.
Yeah, so even without that last line of text, this card's just totally fine, right? 3 mana for a 3/3 haster, which this 1 blue-red is easier to cast than 1 double red, right? When you look at cards like Brazen Scourge in the past. And then giving your vehicles haste can of course be pretty solid. And then if you can ever trigger that with the blue-red deck's looking to loot, and if you can find some of the other signpost cards to go with this you can potentially kind of go off with all of that.
Yeah.
So,
this card's actually pretty good.
Yeah. 3 mana, 3/3 haste, vehicles get haste, and then the upside of drawing 3 and discard 2. That's a really solid package overall.
I like B for Fearless Swashbuckler.
Yeah, I think I like that as well. I just feel like you're not going to be able to do the pirate and vehicle attacking thing as often as you would expect, I feel like, in most instances. So for that reason, I just think just kind of treat it as that is upside, and you'll be able to pull it off, but it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen that often. But 3 mana, 3/3 haste with that vehicle upside is still pretty solid.
Yeah, because I do think you're going to be able to pull off cast a vehicle, crew it, attack with it right now pretty often, and that's actually pretty good. Like that's scary.
Yeah.
Next is Captain Howler Sea Scourge. This is 2 blue-red for a legendary shark pirate. Oh, this one's also just rare. Where's the mythic? Is it somewhere else? Oh, weird. They just didn't get one?
No god,
no gearhulk? Okay. Anyway, it's just a regular rare, but it's 2 blue-red for a 5/4 with ward 2 and pay 2 life. We were comparing these before. Well, how about just both? And whenever you discard 1 or more cards, target creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn for each card discarded this way. And whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player this turn, you draw a card. Man.
Yeah.
So you gotta be able to cycle it like just the right moment.
Yeah, so you need to have a cycler. But if you are the blue-red deck and you have some cycling, it does make blocking really tough for the opponent, because you kind of just have to assume that they have a way to give their creature +2/+0. So maybe you just don't block. And then if you don't block, then you're basically turning your cycler into 2 extra damage and you draw an extra card. Because you can still use this on defense, but it's much, much worse, because on defense, you only get the +2/+0 effect. And you don't get to draw the card, right? So this is something that you want to play in a proactive deck. Now, that being said, this is a 4-mana 5/4 with War 2, Pay 2 life. That's just a pretty solid rate on a creature. It's really hard to kill. And if you are on the aggressive end of the spectrum with this in play, I mean, you can use this to kind of close out your opponents really, really quickly. If you have this and a couple other creatures in play and you're just like, attack. Like, all right, what am I supposed to do?
Right.
Right.
Especially if you just have some little creatures that, might trade up with this. Yeah, no, I think that the correct way to view it is what you just said, Paul. This is a fine creature on rate, and it does give you upside, even though that upside isn't devastating. It's situationally pretty good, and you're already happy. You got a 5/4 for 4 that's very difficult to kill.
Yeah, I think it's probably like a B+.
Yeah, B plus for Captain Howler.
Yeah.
It's not devastating. Next is Debris Beetle. This is 2 green/black for a 6/6 artifact vehicle. It's rare, and it has trample. It has crew 2, and it says when this vehicle enters, each opponent loses 3 life and you gain 3 life.
All right, we got a Siege Beetle. This is the Siege Beetle of the set.
What do you think?
Yeah, this is the question that you're going to now ask. It's like, how much power and toughness on a vehicle, like how much value just in terms of pure combat stats can I get to warrant playing in my deck?
Right.
And I think this card gets there.
It does.
I mean, this thing is monstrous. It's a 4-mana 6/6 trampler with a low crew cost, and it drains your opponent for 3. Like, if you're just beating down, like how do you erase this card
life
ever?
Swing, yeah.
That is huge. I mean,
Massive.
This thing just hits so hard. It is weird that it's in black green, which is not the most aggressive color combination. But you're just putting this in any deck. It just comes into play, drains them for 3, and then you're just not going to be able to profitably block this thing very, very easily. And yeah, I mean, this is just on rate just gives you so much. If this was just a 4-mana 6/6 trampler, I wouldn't be that interested. But the drain 3 is very, very relevant here. I like the Debris Beetle. How much do I like the Debris Beetle?
It's still a vehicle.
Yep, it is a vehicle. It's a good one at that, though, in terms of what it can do. Maybe it's like a B+.
Yeah, I was thinking B or a B+. I mean, it's just really hard for a vehicle to get, into the A range.
Yeah.
Next is Otchik Emerald Radian. This is 3 black green for a 3/3. 6-mana 3/3. It's a legendary insect druid. This is also just a regular rare. And it says when Otchik enters, create a 1/1 green insect creature token for each artifact and or creature card in your graveyard. Whenever another insect you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Otchik. Each opponent loses 1 life.
Yeah,
so this is a build around, right?
Yeah. This is kind of an awesome build around if you try to do the thing that the black-green deck's looking to do, which is cycle big cards, self-mill a bunch of cards, just build up your graveyard, and then just play this, and all of a sudden you get an entire army in a can. And I've played against and played black-green decks, and it is not hard to be able to get 5-ish creatures or artifacts into your graveyard with some self-milling and some cycling. So or 4. Like 4 is pretty easy to pull off.
That's sweet.
And I think you can get 4 to 5. And if you can get 5, even 4, if you can get 4 things into your graveyard and you play this, that's a 6-mana 3/3 that makes 4 tokens. And you can use those tokens to chump. And when you do, you drain your opponent for 1, and this thing continues to grow, right? Which is great.
All of that.
Right. And then you can also use this because it doesn't even feel like you're losing too much. Even on offense, you just attack with some of your insects. If you lose the insects, the Otchik grows, and then you can use that as a way to level up your speed, right? You can use that as a way to drain your opponent and still have this big creature left over. And then the black-green deck also has ways to reanimate creatures. This is an excellent card to reanimate as well. So I think in the black-green deck, if you're doing the self-mill thing and working on all the synergies, this is an excellent payoff for that type of deck. I think this is like a build around A- level card.
Yeah, I like it as a build around A or build around A-. Not build around, well, then it's really bad. You don't want to do that.
Yeah, making 2 tokens with this is not what you want. But if you can make 4
on the low end. 3 or above is great. Yeah.
Right.
I like that card. Next is Collodin. Triumph Caster. This is red-white for a 2/3 legendary human pilot at rare. It says mounts and vehicles you control have haste. Whenever a mount you control enters, it becomes saddled until end of turn. And same thing with vehicles. It gets kind of auto-crewed, becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. That is scary, dude. That is like, are you kidding? That thing comes down on 2. Doesn't do anything. But then like every turn, it's like mount, slam, vehicle, boom, hit you. I mean, some of these vehicles are just so gnarly if if they have a high crew cost or whatever.
Yeah, and it's on a nice body. It is weird that there's this and also the blue-red card that they both give your vehicles haste. But yeah, I mean, when you play this, you're just all of a sudden wondering, okay, well, what are they going to play? Like, are they going to play just some giant vehicle and just hit me really, really hard? The thing is, though, I have found that you really can't afford to play too many vehicles in your decks, even if they look interesting. So for that reason, I think you take some points away from it. Where this really shines also is just being able to saddle your mounts, because mounts have some pretty nice payoffs when you saddle them. They always come with some kind of a bonus, right? So if you can find a way to get that into play and just use that ability, that's really strong. Red-white is aggressive. This is just a nice card to play in those decks. But I'm just wondering if this plays out not quite as strong as you would think. Like, it looks really, really exciting, but just how good is this effect actually?
Probably based on how many mounts you have. Because like you said, you're kind of capped on vehicles. You put your 5th vehicle in a deck and you're probably making a mistake. But like, there's no limit to how many mounts you can play as long as they're serviceable creatures on their own. Plus, this thing kind of gets you extra action because the mounts have bonuses for being saddled and then attacking, most of them. And this lets you do that without having to do anything extra. I would be very scared of this card. I respect it. This is a type of card that if you can build around it a little bit, I think pays you back. I mean, I'd give it like a build around B. Like, I think it's solid.
Yeah, I would say that the upside for this is like a B plus in the right red-white deck, if you can kind of get that going. But on average, I can imagine this playing out more like a B level card.
Next is Explosive Getaway. This is 3 red-white for a sorcery at rare. It says exile up to 1 target artifact or creature. Return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. And Explosive Getaway deals 4 damage to each creature. So you can save one thing.
Yeah, that's a really powerful effect at a really low cost, right? This is usually effects like this cost 7 or whatever. Usually it's like a wrath effect where you get to stave one of your creatures, but here it's 5 mana. That's really castable. And it is, like I said before, sweepers and aggressive color combinations can always be kind of awkward. But in this instance, you still get to be the person that has the creature left over, right? So even in a red-white deck, this could still be totally fine to play. You play this, you just kill everything else, and then you get your creature back, and you're basically gonna be up a card in a lot of instances. And also just based on its cost. Another a nice card that you can splash for in more controlling decks, because this is obviously a more controlling card, in general. But in like a red-white aggro deck, still wiping out your own board is not ideal,
right?
Right? Like, imagine going Kaladin, mount something, and then you have this, and you're like, would I rather have Explosive Getaway in my deck or Lightning Strike in my red-white deck?
Right. Wouldn't be shocked if it ends up being Lightning Strike, but it is worth noting that the absurd upside of Explosive Getaway is like, that could be the swingiest card in the whole set.
Yeah.
In certain scenarios, like where you just get to save your best thing and it literally kills everything else. 4 is critical. If it was 3, you kind of put it in this category of killing like small to medium creatures, but 4 is close enough to kill everything. It doesn't technically, but like, kills a lot.
Yeah. We'll note too, though, is it's not as good in this set because vehicles exist, and this deals damage to all the creatures. So if your opponents have some vehicles in play, like, you don't quite get to blow them out in a similar fashion because, let's say they have some weird mix of creatures and vehicles, and then so you don't quite get all the value that you would want.
You mean like it kills all their creatures, but then if they have a vehicle left over, they can untap, play a creature, crew the vehicle.
Whereas in a normal set, your opponents are just going to play creatures every turn.
They're just on
like
empty.
Their board is just going to be all creatures. Where here, they're not going to have nothing in play. They're going to probably have a vehicle in play left over, which means they don't get totally wiped out and they'll still have some kind of permanent in play. That being said, I still think this card is good, and you can certainly use this to just completely blow your opponents out and win games you kind of had no business winning. And so for that reason, I think the upside's worth it to play even in your red-white decks with some creatures. Because
would you give it a B+?
Yeah, I like it at B+. Obviously, it has A+ potential depending on the matchup, but there are going to be instances where your opponents have bigger creatures. There's going to be instances where they have some vehicles where you won't always get maximum value out of this card. But I do think the upside's there.
Okay, yeah, I agree. I think that those, and the fact that it's in a color combo that has generally small creatures, those are 3 strikes against it that keep it out of just like straight up being an A.
Yeah, if this was a black-white card,
right?
It's an A.
It's probably just
right?
an A.
So.
Next is Sita-Varma, Masked Racer. This is blue-green for a 2/3 legendary human rogue at rare, and it has exhaust. Green, blue, X. Put X +1/+1 counters on Sita-Varma, then you may have the base power and toughness of each other creature you control become equal to Sita-Varma's power until end of turn. What? So if I put 2 counters on this thing, becomes 4, and I can have all my creatures become 4/4. Right,
which is not necessarily going to be enough to push through. So I feel like you're gonna want to probably exhaust for 3.
Yeah, which
right.
is
You
6
exhaust
mana.
this for 3, so you pay 6 mana and then you get a 5/6. But the problem is, and it's not tapped, so you can attack with this as well.
Yeah,
but you pay 6 mana, you turn this into a 5/6, and then all your creatures become a 5/5 that can attack. Now, keep in mind, though, this is attached to just a 2-mana 2/3 body, which we're always going to play, right? It's a blue-green 2/3. So if you treat this as like, hey, it's a 2-mana 2/3 body with an exhaust ability that's admittedly expensive, but still something that you can drain your mana into in the late game for some kind of value. It's like a 2-mana 2/3 with potential overrun upside, but in most instances, you're just like happy to just turn this into a 4 or 5 or something. And if anything, you're even not going to use this exhaust ability until super late. Like, there is upside there, right? It's a 2/3 with late game upside that can potentially win you the game.
Definitely. And the fact that you can threaten to activate this at some stage of the game and then going forward makes big combat steps very, very uncomfortable for your opponent.
But
it's still very mana clunky.
It's like by itself, it doesn't just like take over the game or swing the game in any way. But it is a very, it's they costed this reasonably aggressively enough where I'm always going to play it in my blue green decks, right? Like you're going to be
B-.
Yeah, it's probably somewhere in the B- B range. I might give it a B just because the blue-green deck is the ramp deck. So you'll be able to ramp into and have a lot of mana available in those decks. So because of that, I'll tick it up. If this was, for example, a red-green card, I might put it at B-. But I'm going to trust that there's enough ramp effects in blue-green where this will be better than it would be in other color combinations.
Okay, next is Sabsunin Luxa Embodied. This is 3 green-blue for a 6/6 legendary god. This one's mythic. And it has reach, trample, and indestructible. It can't attack or block unless it has an even number of counters on it. And it does remind you that 0 is even. At the beginning of your first main phase, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then, if it has an odd number of counters on it, draw 2 cards. Okay, what? So is it like every other turn I either get to attack/block with it, or I'm drawing 2 cards?
Yeah, that's exactly. So you
and
play
the
this
turn
on
I cast it, I can block?
Yeah, so the turn you play this, it's a 6/6 reach, trample, indestructible. Good luck attacking into that thing. You're not. Like once this is in play, you play the game of I need to try to pick my spots here and find the turns where Sabsunin can't attack or block to try to close out the game. The problem is if the game goes on for basically 3 more turns and you can draw 4 cards off of this Sabsunin, the game's over.
This
you've drawn 4 cards.
This
blocks everything. It's easy to cast. And this one is actually turned on, and it doesn't actually require much of you. I've seen this card be played, and it was completely ridiculous. This might be one of the best rares in the entire set. This card is an A at least, and I wouldn't be shocked if this is an A plus. Like, this thing is unbelievable. The fact that if they worded it the other way, where like the turn you played you can't block, you take a ton of points away from this. But the fact that you play this and you just completely reach and indestructible, like it completely brick walls your opponent. And then on the following turn, basically it's like, okay, you can't attack me this turn. The next turn, I draw 2 cards. So I'll be able to stabilize and play whatever else I need because I have extra gas. And then guess what? On the next turn, I have an 8/8 Trampler.
Come on.
This is a 5-drop, by the way. This costs 5 mana, by the way, which is ridiculous. And then you can either attack with an 8/8 Trampler, or if you need to rebuild, you keep this thing back, just keep playing things, and then on the next turn you draw 2 more cards.
This card's ridiculous. Silly. This is just silly.
Yeah.
I like AA plus for Sabsunin. That is ridiculous. Wow.
She is amazing.
Is it a frog too? Nice.
It's a frog god. Yeah.
Frog god. Next is actually one of 3 triple colored cards in the set. Samut. The driving force is 3 red, green, white for a 4/5 legendary human warrior cleric at rare. It's got first strike, vigilance, and haste. It has start your engines. It says other creatures you control get +X+0, where X is your speed, and non-creature spells you cast cost X less to cast, where X is your speed. Wow. So you're getting the reduction in the pump by 1 just by having this on the battlefield.
Yeah, noting that it doesn't pump itself, it pumps other creatures. But yeah, when the turn you play this, you will at least give your entire team +1/+0 on a decent body.
And you're slamming right away too?
You're slamming right away. Now the non-creature spell bonus is okay, but by that point it's not that impressive. But yeah, but what you're kind of paying for is that static effect on top of a pretty decent beater, right? A 6 mana, 4/5 flying vigilance haste. I actually expected
first strike vigilance haste, yeah.
First strike vigilance haste. It's weird. I kind of expected this to maybe cost 1 less, just because it is a 3-color card.
Yeah.
And when you delve into a 3rd color, you really need an extremely powerful card to kind of have it be worth it. And I'm not sure if this gives you a lot, but I'm not sure how. Like, I'm not sure if this is that, because this is a 6-drop.
Yes.
And I'm not sure just how much bang you're getting for your buck here for this type of effect. Now, if your speed is higher, and oftentimes it will be, in a lot of instances, this will be something where it gives all your creatures +2/+0 until end of turn. And how good is that as a static effect, right? Like, this isn't the right colors.
There's also an interesting timing thing with this card, right?
If they kill this.
Well, what I meant was.
Because it has first strike.
Because it has first strike. So, like, if you attack with 3 creatures, it hits, that increases your speed, like, now, right?
Yeah. So, presumably, they'll have to chump the Summit to not get blown out there, right?
Okay.
Where, like, you because it doesn't have trample. So, I imagine if you want to prevent having your opponent increase their speed from the first strike, you're going to want to block the Samut rather, and make it so that you don't get extra pumps out of it. Now, if you have a deck that can really get your engines going early, and this thing comes into play, and all of a sudden it's just all your team gets +3/+0, that is a pretty big deal, right? Even your smallest creatures at that point just get to trade up for everything, which turns this kind of into almost a static effect that just makes all your creatures that you have to block. But again, this is a 3-color card, right? This is not something that you're going to want to really play in your red-white decks, because you're not going to have the mana fixing to do so. And if you want your mana to work, you're going to have to play a bunch of tap lands to be able to try to play this. So where you end up playing this card is a green-based deck a green-red exhaust deck or a green-white deck, because then you will have some mana fixing to be able to pull this off. And in that case, I think this card is a solid, but not completely game-breaking card.
Yeah, it looks like a build around B to me, or maybe a B plus if it's really easy to, if you get a dual plus a fixer or something. I mean, all three of these triple cards have green in them, so they are theoretically splashable off of the green mana fixing you get. What do you want to give Sam as far as the grade goes?
I would give it a B, but noting that you need to have the right deck to actually play this card, and I personally wouldn't take this very highly. Just because I don't want to start out my draft with some kind of Naya aggro deck. I just would rather just take something and try to stay on rails and be 2 colors than try to splash for something like this.
Yeah, if there's anything we've learned, it's that generally speaking, splashing for cards like this is not worth it in the end. That you're just better off just not. Next is Loot, the Pathfinder. This is 2 blue, green, red for a 2/4 legendary Beast Noble. This one's mythic rare. It has double strike, vigilance, and haste. And it has 3 different exhaust abilities, 1 for each color that it costs. So it has exhaust green, tap it, add 3 mana of any one color. And it has haste, remember. It also has exhaust blue, tap it, draw 3 cards, or exhaust red, tap it, loot deals 3 damage to any target. Are you serious?
How is this card 5 mana and Samut 6 mana, right?
I guess it's a mythic, but...
It's a mythic, but yeah, this is a card that's worthy of splashing.
Holy smokes.
And this is a card that I would take early because the abilities on this card, they're just outrageous. I mean, 5 mana for a 2/4 double strike vigilance haste is just kind of solid stats by itself. Mm-hmm. But you're telling me you play this card on, because oftentimes I think what you want to do is play this on turn 6 and treat it as a 6-drop and the ultimate mole drifter.
Right.
Slash flame tongue Kavu. Like this card, like you play this on turn 6 and you have a hasting double striking vigilance creature that you can immediately pay blue mana to draw 3 cards off of, which is ridiculous.
You can even attack with it first.
And then you can attack with it. And then if it survives, you can then lightning bolt something or ramp. Like this card is just outrageous. I think on power level, this card is an A, and you just need to make sure you can cast the card.
I mean, how do you feel about Black Lotus, Lightning Bolt, and Ancestral all on 1 card?
That is what this is.
I mean, come on, that's insane.
Oh man,
yeah. The only question with Loot is just castability. Like, can you reliably make this card work from a casting standpoint? And if you can, you should.
Yeah, absolutely. I imagine most likely like blue-green is the color that's ramping and finding mana sources. So if you're just a blue-green deck and want a sweet win condition, dude, this is one of the best ones.
Yeah, you pick up a lightning strike and a loot, and you're off to the races on the red splash. Yeah. What do you want to give it? Given the mana cost.
Yeah, that's tough because I haven't done these with you that often. Mm-hmm. I would say that on pure power level, assuming you have a responsible mana base, this is like a build around A. Mm-hmm. But given the fact that there will be instances where you maybe can't play this or it's really difficult and it's 3 colors, I don't know.
I would give it a B plus at that level because there is also, you do need to get this thing down on the battlefield, and there will be times where you don't get to have the luxury of having the extra mana available to exhaust right away, and they kill it. Right. And it's like you're putting a lot of resources into this thing, mana fixing it. It's difficult to cast. And sometimes you won't get your 3 cards back out of it or your lightning bolt out of it, you try to play around that to the best you can. And sometimes you just straight up will not be able to put this card onto the stack because of mana. So I would say B plus A minus range for it.
Yeah. I mean, I would treat this as a 6-drop. Basically, just treat this as a 6-drop, and I feel like in general you might win more games.
And save that blue mana.
Yeah, save the blue mana. So that's why I was thinking you want to be looking to play this in a blue-green base deck. Because if on the splash, that's not great because you only have the 1 blue source. Mm-hmm. But if you're a blue-green base deck splashing the red, then oftentimes on turn 5, if you have a ramp spell, you can be able to play this with the mana left over. And then then you're talking about a 6 mana 2/4 double strike vigilance haste that draws 3 cards when it enters a battlefield. Right. And then if it lives, you lightning bolt something. Yeah. That is a ton of value.
That is unbeatable.
Yeah. So I like, just because it's a 3-color card, I guess we can go like, yeah, B plus A minus.
B
that's
plus
fine.
A minus. I think that's the right place. I mean, it is obviously an A, right? Like just as a card, but we're just talking about getting on the battlefield. Okay. Next is Mimeoplasm Revered One. This is black, blue, green X for a legendary ooze at Mythic Rare. It's a 0/0, but as it enters, you exile up to X creature cards from your graveyard. It enters with 3 +1/+1 counters on it for each creature card exiled this way. 3 for each? Wow. And then it has 2 mana. It becomes a copy of target creature exiled with it, except for it's a 0/0 and has this ability.
Yeah, so the way that this card works is for 3 mana, it does absolutely nothing.
Right.
And it starts once you get to 4 mana. When you get to 4 mana, you basically play this, you exile one thing, and it will become a 3/3. And then you can copy its abilities, but the creature is a 0/0, so you can't just exile a 7/7 and then pay 2 mana and have this be a 10/10 in attack.
I see.
Because that would just be a little bit too powerful.
It just gets its abilities.
It gets its abilities. So if there's, let's say you have a loot in your graveyard or something.
Right.
Then you can get
now
some
we're really popping off.
Some cool value off of that. But where you really start getting value in terms of just pure rate of this card is when you get to 5 mana, right? When you get to 5 mana, you exile 2 things and this becomes a 6/6, and then you can copy whatever keywords or what have you at a cost of 2 mana. And then for 6 mana, then you get a 9/9, but the thing is, when you do, it's a very large creature, but a lot of it there is a setup cost here, right? You need to have creatures in the graveyard, and you don't know what those creatures are going to be. So I like to think of the fail case scenario where you just exile just random creatures that don't do a whole lot. And then you're just looking at this as something that's just kind of a rarely large creature, but how good is that card actually, right? Because then we're starting to compare this to something like that 9/7 vanilla creature, right? For 5 mana, where for this, you get a 5 mana 6/6 or a 6 mana 9/9 or a 7 mana 12/12 with no other extra keywords. Now, if you exile like a trampler or a flyer, that ends up being really, really exciting, but you do have to pay the 2 mana for this. But then you also have to account for the fact that this is a 3-color card where sometimes you're just getting a 5 mana 6/6.
No way I'm splashing for this.
And that's just not particularly exciting.
And you were talking about fail cases, and there's kind of 3 cases here at all, right? There's one where you just don't have anything in your yard, or you only have 1 creature in your yard. So even if you have all the mana in the world, you can't make this thing huge. It's still just a 3/3. The next case up is you have kind of vanilla-ish or creatures that have abilities that don't really matter on a bigger creature. And then the best case is what you mentioned, where you get some type of evasion or trample or whatever. I would give Mimeoplasm. I just don't think that it's worth splashing for just sort of a big dumb creature. So, I mean, I don't really want to give it an F, but like, I feel like it'll play at that level where it's just like, even if you have the option to splash for it, you're probably just like, nah.
Yeah, it's just, I think this, if you have a black-green self-mill deck with some decent mana fixing, and, you can kind of use this as a win condition. But you know what? It's like, how much different is this than the 3 and a green 2/2 uncommon that enters a battlefield, mills you 2 cards, and gets a bunch of +1/+1 counters? Like I played against that card. It's better than I thought it'd be, and oftentimes it's like a 4 mana 6/6, right? And that's on color. You don't have to splash.
I think this is worse than that.
Yeah, I'd much rather play something like this. And the fact that this is a 3-color card, I think Mimeoplasm's probably just a D.
Yeah, it's an F or a D. I just don't think it's worth it. Okay, a couple of artifacts here. Market Back Walker is XX for an artifact creature construct at rare. It says this creature enters with X +1/+1 counters on it, and you can pay 4 mana to put a +1/+1 counter on it. And when it dies, you draw a card for each +1/+1 counter on it. So we've had different Walker variants, and this one does give you some value, but these are clunky cards. It's 4 mana for a 2/2. It's 6 mana for a 3/3. Like, these are not powerful, and the ability to add counters to these cards is powerful, but 4 mana is a lot.
4 mana is a lot, and I feel like this is probably this might be the weakest Walker variant that we've had.
For sure.
We've had Walking Ballista, which is nice because, hey, you're spending a lot of mana, but you're able to distribute counters to deal damage to things, so you can use that to potentially kill things. And then Hangerback Walker was obviously great just because it didn't cost 4 mana to put a counter on that. And then when it died, you got a bunch of Thopters. Here, you get to draw a card. So let's just look at the different mana costs real quick and just see where you like this card. And I'm not sure there's a point in the mana curve where you ever really love this card. At 2 mana, you get a 1/1. When it dies, you draw a card. Okay, that's fine. It's not that great.
That's very not great, yeah.
Exactly. For 4 mana, you get a 2/2, which is a pretty weak body, and then when it dies, it draws you 2 cards. So if you trade this with, if you trade this with the bear, that's fine. And then at 6 mana, you get to draw 3 cards, but then the thing is, you're paying 6 mana and you're getting a 3/3, right? So it's still just at no point do I think this card is insane, but there is flexibility here.
I like the 4 mana slot out of the ones that you mentioned. That's okay.
Yeah, 4 mana to trade with a bear or 2 mana creature, and then have it draw you 2 cards. And the fact that it's a mana sink and not a great one, but it is a mana sink. And there is the fact that you could play it at all points in the mana curve. There are definitely points you get for that, because if you just rate this individually at 4 mana, make a 2/2, dies, draw 2 cards, or 6 mana, make a 3/3, it's not that strong. But the fact that you can play this at 2, 4, and 6 and have it be just kind of a flexible card that's good at all points in the game, there is value there, which is what kind of made the other walkers in the past also overperform.
Yeah, I think the issue with this card is twofold. One, it doesn't put enough pressure on the opponent. It is a primarily defensive card. It's like, okay, I got a 4 mana 2/2, but you don't want to attack me, because if I trade it off for something and I get these cards, like, you're going to be way behind. Your opponent can choose not to attack you or only attack you with things that it doesn't block well. So that's not a great scenario. It is not applying any direct pressure to your opponent, and it takes a very long time for this card to get to the point where it can. And then the other issue, and this is probably the biggest issue, is that your creature no longer being able to attack, block, or be on the battlefield does not mean that it died.
Right.
These cards can get bounced. These cards can get put back on top of or into libraries. They can get exiled, and you get nothing.
Also, like, this is not the scariest attacker either.
That's what I'm saying.
If they just attack you with their 6-drop, you just take it.
Right.
Right. And then all of us, like, this is best served as a blocker, right? Where you're just like, please, I just want to trade this with anything so I can cash this in for a couple of cards. But you can't do it on demand unless you're maybe
That's what I was saying. Your opponent can just not attack you in that scenario.
Right. So, but it is flexible. It is versatile. I don't know. I maybe it's like a C.
It's a C probably. I mean, I just think that, like, it's a C plus, maybe something like that for Market Backwalker. Next is Lifecraft Engine. This is 3 mana for a 4/4 vehicle at rare. It's an artifact. As it enters, you choose a creature type. Vehicle creatures you control are the chosen creature type in addition to their other types. Each creature you control of the chosen type other than this vehicle gets +1/+1. And the crew cost is freaking 3. No way, right?
Yeah, this looks exciting. There's a lot of text on this card, but it's a 3 mana 4/4 vehicle. It doesn't pump itself. And there's just enough variety, I feel, in just the different creature types here, where this just really doesn't quite get you to where you need. This is probably maybe more of an interesting constructed card as an anthem effect for whatever tribal deck that you have. But I've played against this card and I've been pretty underwhelmed overall.
This card looks terrible to me.
I've had people play this, and it's just, for the most part, was just a 3 mana vehicle that was a 4/4.
That crews 3. I mean, that's a bad card.
That is a bad card. Now, it will pump one creature that you have in play.
You just need to be leveraging. I mean, we should technically give this a build around.
Yeah.
But I just don't see this set being built that way. So I would probably just give this an F or a D, something like that.
I think it's better than an F because people will play this card just like it's an artifact. But I don't think it's a very good card. I think it's a D. Like, you can put this in your deck. When you play it, at least the one creature you have in play will, like, imagine it's like it's an artifact. It's a 3 mana 4/4 vehicle, ETB, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Something like kind of close-ish to that.
That sounds like an F to me. I mean, the crew cost
I
of
think
3.
that's a
With
D.
The crew cost of 3. I just don't think you can put 3 mana.
There's a lot of pilots that exist in this format. So crew 3 is way more manageable in this format than others. I don't think this card is good. I just feel like crew 3 in this format is different than crew 3 in others because there's the 1 mana red goblin that crews things that cost 3 power. There's the 3 mana armadillo cloak that makes a pilot. So there's enough pilots where this can be playable, but even then, I think it's a D. And
it's colorless.
Yeah.
So it can go into any deck. All right. So we'll say D for Lifecraft Engine, but not something we're looking to go for. Next is Monument of Endurance. This is 3 mana for an artifact at rare. It says, whenever you discard a card, choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn. You can draw a card, or you can make a treasure, or you can have each opponent lose 3 life. Yeah, I'm not playing this though. This is some type of build around.
It's so sweet. Yeah. It's a sweet card. I'm going to take it and try to draft around it.
Yeah, so tell me the build around potential. Is this actually a good build around?
I do. I think so. I mean, it's the card that you play in your blue-red cycling deck. Yeah. Right? That's the whole point.
And you get a card back out of it at some point.
You're rummaging. So the first cycle, you get your card back. I think the best mode on this is obviously the draw card option, but obviously if there's also an instance where you just need to kill your opponent, I mean this can kill your opponent pretty quickly, assuming that you're cycling. And then if there's bigger effects like draw 2 discard 2 effects, right, then you can draw a card and also make a treasure or drain them. I don't think this card is great, and this is basically a card you never play in anything other than the blue-red cycling deck. Okay. But it's a dream card that I would like to try to play with and see how it plays out. I think it's like a build around C+.
Is it better than that? Is it a build around like B+ or A or something? I mean,
maybe it's a build around B.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a build around B, but I am definitely going to take this card and try to do the thing myself.
Yeah, you have to
draft the red deck.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, if you can get over the hump of getting back the 3 mana, basically, this does pay you back, and it even is a win con. So
yeah, and this is excellent to go with the 5 mana red common. It's a 4/5 reach creature that lets you rummage every turn.
Oh yeah, every turn.
Right. So if you play that, you're drawing cards. You're draining them. Yeah.
Build around B, trending towards build around B+ by the end of I had it at F. Now all of a sudden it's a build around B+, so it came around. Yeah. Next is the Planeswalker, colorless one, the Aether Spark. It is 4 mana for a 4 loyalty legendary artifact Planeswalker equipment. We just lost a script here. Like, okay. Legendary artifact Planeswalker equipment. Like, this is just ridiculous. It's a mythic rare. It says, as long as the Aether Spark is attached to a creature, the Aether Spark can't be attacked and has, whenever equipped creature deals combat damage during your turn, put that many loyalty counters on the Aether Spark. It has 3 abilities, +1 loyalty, attach the Aether Spark to up to 1 target creature you control, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature, -5 to draw 2 cards, -10 add 10 mana of any one color. So I guess we just mostly ignore that last one, right?
Yeah, you mostly ignore that last one. This is just a really weird card with a million words, and I wish it was more satisfying. But basically the way that this card works is you play it, and then you tick it up, +1, you attach it to a creature, right? And then that immediately basically becomes an equipment that puts a +1/+1 counter on that creature. So obviously that's not the strongest thing in the world, right? 4 mana to put a +1/+1 counter on something, but it's repeatable, and it does have the ability to get a ton of loyalty. And then you attack with the creature. So 3 mana, let's say you play a 3/3. Turn 4, you play this, you equip it, you turn it into a 4/4, you smash your opponent, and let's say they, trade with their 4/2 or whatever, or you connect. Once you do, this is just, it's not even combat damage to player. It's just combat damage. Yeah. And when you do, you put that many loyalty counters on the Aether Spark. So you tick it up to 5, so now you hit them for 4. All of a sudden it goes up to 9. Like you can't kill this thing, right? It's just 9 is almost impossible to kill. And then your opponents, they're going to either trade with the creature. And if not, they're still going to not be able to do that much damage to this. And then the next turn, you can either choose to continue adding counters to your creature, right? And just have this get to like infinite loyalty, or you can cash in some of those counters to draw some cards. So those are the two most important effects. The 10 mana, you're just not going to do that all that often. I just don't think
you're going to do it much, but it's not because you don't have the loyalty.
Yeah. And the nice thing about this is it is still a planeswalker. It doesn't give you the craziest modes, but it's still a planeswalker that has a potential to give you a ton of loyalty. Mm-hmm. Now, you do kind of get blown out if your opponent has a removal spell for your creature.
Wow, that's
like if
really
you go,
tough.
If you go turn 4 Aether Spark, equip onto my thing, and they're just like kill your creature, and then all of a sudden you have a naked Aether Spark in play, and you didn't get the counters. So you have to be mindful of that. So you have to pick your spots when you do this. But, I mean, a planeswalker that gets a bunch of loyalty can, and then you can use it to cash it in for some cards, and for the most part, you're just going to be able to continue adding +1/+1 counters to your creature in a colorless card.
Does it fall off?
Just in terms of
at the end of the turn?
I don't believe so.
So it just can't be attacked at all? If like,
oh, you're absolutely correct. Yeah, it cannot. So basically, if the creature survives combat, it looks like it just can't be attacked. It is an artifact, so you can blow this up. Actually, it's actually easy to kill this card relative to other planeswalkers because it is an artifact. So you can't target this with Collision Course or all the other disenchant effects. But yeah, I mean, I guess if you have to just treat this more like like an equipment more than anything,
right?
That just gets infinite charge counters, right? It's
and
an
that you can cash in for cards occasionally.
That you can occasionally cash in for cards, or also just use this to add counters. I mean, you can also have a scenario where, the turn you play this, you equip, attack, and then on the next turn you attack. This thing all of a sudden has a million counters. Let's say they trade with your creature, then you play another creature, and then you move this over. And then all of a sudden this thing, basically you can have this thing just get kind of out of control, it seems, in terms of +1/+1 counters. And then once it gets pretty high, you can use this to kind of cash this in for some cards. It's really tricky card to evaluate, though, right?
I've never seen anything like it. On one hand, this is interesting. Like, I'm interested in how this card plays out, and it does seem like it might actually be pretty powerful on top of it, and kind of something that we haven't seen before. On the other hand, like, do these words have any meaning whatsoever? Like, this is a planeswalker, which is supposed to be like a being in this space, yet this one's also an artifact and somehow an equipment. It's like, this feels AI generated or something. It just feels like a bunch of jumbled, like, well, what if we just start smashing every keyword we can? The thing is, that doesn't mean that it won't play out well, like in an interesting or even powerful or even both way. But I just don't like this just seems very strange to me to try to make a card like this, but
I agree that it's very strange. I think one of the ways to have some counterplay to this outside of using disenchant effects is you kill the creature and then this becomes unattached, and then you can start chipping away.
Attack it. But even then it's 5 loyalty.
And presumably if you pick because I'm imagining I'm playing the Aether Spark when my opponent's tapped out, like they play a creature and they're tapped out.
Right.
And then I put this on one of my creatures and then I attack, and the creature, even if it trades, this thing is going to have a ton of loyalty on it. And so it's going to be a really, really annoying card. And given that I feel like this format is not necessarily on the hyper aggressive end of the spectrum, you can get some pretty good value off of this. But I've never seen anything like this. It's a really, really hard card to evaluate. But I would give it like a baseline B.
I would say B+. I feel like the put a +1/+1 counter on that creature is something that is dangerous.
Yeah, you know what? Yeah, I'm convinced. Yeah, I think B+ B+ totally works here, because that +1/+1 counter is super relevant. That means that's just extra loyalty counters on the Aether Spark, and then they're just not going to be able to kill it. And then on the following turn, if you're in a pinch, you can just use this to draw a bunch of cards as well.
Yeah, and once you cash in the 2 cards, like, you're kind of in the gravy area.
And it's colorless. It's just an excellent first pick.
Right.
So.
Plus, we learned our lesson from the Leyline Axe. Don't diss the 4-mana equipment.
Let's skew higher now on
Mythic
the equipment.
Rare. So A- for the Aether Spark. Next is Radiant Lotus. This is 6 mana for an artifact at Mythic Rare. It has tap, sacrifice 1 or more artifacts, and then you choose a color, Target player adds 3 mana of the chosen color for each artifact sacrificed this way. I'm just going to say no on this, right? This is just an F.
Yeah, this is an F. Maybe some weird combo constructed deck can play this, but this is an F for limited.
And then there's a cycle of, what are these, enemy duels?
Yeah, these are the Verge lands. So there were the allied Verge lands that we saw in the previous set, and now we have the opposing color. So this is great for constructed.
Yeah, we'll use Beach Bone Verge as our example. It's a land at rare. It taps to add black mana, but it can tap to add white, but you can only do that if you control a plains or a swamp. And then there's one that's red that can do blue if you meet the requirement, green that can do black, white that can do red, and blue that can do green if you meet those requirements.
Yeah, and if you're playing a deck that's these colors, there's just no downside to this, right? Yeah. And it gives you upside because it gives you the other color. So I do think if I know for sure that I'm these colors, I'm going to take these reasonably high. They're just very, very solid lands. It just makes your mana that much better. Yep. So I do like these lands a fair amount.
C plus range, like playable, okay,
somewhere between C and C plus, I would say. It's kind of like the gain lands. It's like they're probably a little bit better than the gain lands because they come into play untapped, right? And if you're those colors specifically, it will give you both colors. So I would say if we say the gain lands are C, this is like a touch better than that.
Last card from we have one sheet of special guests, but this one is the Muraganda Raceway. This is a land at rare, and it says start your engines. Again, we saw that at the uncommon level as well, but that's your land starts your engines. It taps for colorless, and this one's actually really cool, Paul. It's max speed. It taps to add 2 colorless. That's a sweet land.
Yeah, that's
I'm
a cool land.
I'm still not going to play it, but
right. That's the thing. It's just, I feel like at most you want to play one colorless raceway in your decks if you really need a way to start your engines, and that's kind of why you want to play it. But because they're colorless lands and you only want exactly one, and I don't see this one honestly being that much better than the common one that we saw or the uncommon one. It's like if you need one, you'll play it, but they're kind of like D+ lands to me.
Yeah, same. Any colorless land, even if it's untapped, I'm just kind of allergic to those. Okay, Paul, we're going to kind of cruise through the special guests because they appear so infrequently that we want to touch on them, but they're not the type of cards that we need to go super deep on because they just don't show up very often. But we want to touch on them. So the first one is Cavalier of Dawn. It's 2 white for a 4/6 elemental knight. These are all considered mythic rares, but they show up, even less frequently than that. It's a 4/6 vigilance, and when it enters, you destroy up to 1 target non-land permanent. Its controller gets a 3/3 golem token. And when this thing dies, you return target artifact or enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand. This card's great. I mean, if you can get the triple mana cost down, it's awesome.
Yeah, and the white decks usually are doing the artifact thing as well. And sometimes you can even if your opponent doesn't have something good, you can turn one of your small creatures into a bigger creature as well. Yes. So this is just a solid creature around, just noting that triple white is pretty hard to cast. But if you can pull it off, it's an A- level card in terms of power level. But just noting that the mana cost.
The way to sum it up, the question I would want to ask you is if you opened this, would you be good taking it pack one, pick one?
I think I would. I would take it, but you will have to skew your mana base accordingly. And if I'm trying to put this type of card in my deck, I would put a higher emphasis on taking gain lands and night markets, just to make sure that I can play this more often. Because of how difficult it is to cast, maybe it kind of skews more towards like a B+ level card. Right. It
on plays like an A- when you cast it. Yeah. Next is Thoughtcast. This is 4 and a blue for a sorcery. Draw 2 cards, but it's got affinity for artifacts.
Yeah, no, I don't really want this card. This is just divinate. We just can't play divination. The only time this card actually ends up being okay is if it costs 2, but you can't do that often enough. This is like a D. Yeah,
D for Thoughtcast. Next is Whir of Invention. This is blue X for an instant with improvise, which means that your artifacts, you can tap them to pay for the X cost of this. And it says search your library for an artifact card with mana value X or less, put it onto the battlefield and then shuffle. That's just an F, right?
That's just an F. Blue is just too hard.
Bone Miser is 4 and a black for a 4/4 zombie wizard. And it says, whenever you discard a creature card, you get a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Whenever you discard a land card, you add double black. And whenever you discard a non-creature, non-land card, you draw a card.
Yeah, so this is kind of like a nice payoff for the various cycling decks, or if you're black-red, you can have this kind of payoff. Now, noting that this costs 5 mana and it has to live, but when it does, I mean, you can...
It has a home.
Yeah, if you have a cycling deck, you can kind of have this be like a build-around type card. But, compare this to that 3 mana rare that we had. That the 3 mana artifact seems more interesting. Yeah. It's harder to kill and get off the battlefield, and it's cheaper. Whereas with this one, by the time you play it, you might have already cycled a bunch of stuff already.
Right.
And it's just a 5 mana 4/4 the turn that you play it. So it's like a build around
C+,
B-, something like that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Next is Lord of the Undead. This is 1 black for a 2/2 zombie. And it says other zombie creatures get +1/+1. That's all of them, including not yours. And then 1 and a black, including, and then you can pay 1 and a black and tap it to return target zombie card from your graveyard to your hand.
Yeah,
I don't know. Zombie build around. Is that something that we're interested in here?
Yeah, probably like a zombie build around B. If you have a lot, of self mill and zombies, which I'm not sure that there are, but if you can put that together, then you would take this. But you double black, kind of hard to cast. It pumps your opponent's zombies. So if they randomly have a bunch of zombies, it's not great for you either.
Well, at the common slot, there is Engine Rat and Deathless Pilot. Those are both zombies.
Okay.
Technically, Walking Sarcophagus is a zombie. That's the colorless one.
Yeah, Returning Engine Rat's pretty cool.
Yeah. So maybe there's a little something here, but this is the type of card that you do not need to seek out. Right? You just end up with one and you're like, sure. Next is Chandra's Ignition. This is 3 red for a sorcery. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to each other creature and each opponent.
High risk, high reward, but man, it also hits opponents. So it
does.
That is pretty big. Now, if your opponents don't know about this card, I mean, you can really just, this is probably at its best in like a red-green deck with just creatures that have high power and high toughness. So if you build around this card and you play it, I imagine this card is going to be, it's like a wrath that also hits your opponent and you get to keep your biggest creature.
Yep, that's what it does. Okay. It's just extraordinarily high risk and it has a high setup cost.
Agreed.
I would be reluctant to play Chandra's Ignition without having a really strong reason. It's just, there's times where it just doesn't do anything. There's times where it's worse for you. And there's times where you spend 5 mana and they say, pay blue, bounce your creature, sucker. And you're just like, that's the game. You just lost.
I'm going to lose to this card probably a fair amount.
Definitely more than you win with it.
And then when I have it in my hand, it's just, I'm not going to have good targets or it's just not going to do anything.
It's a gnarly card to put on the bonus sheet, by the way, because it's just you can't see it coming,
Yeah.
Here's a prediction, Paul. When we're in the booth at the Pro Tour, we're going to have to call a game where somebody is playing around Chandra's Ignition, because they just know the sheet and they went deep. I would not be looking to play it though. Next is Galvanic Blast. It's red for an instant. Galvanic Blast deals 2 damage to any target, but it's got Metalcraft. If you control 3 or more artifacts, it does 4 damage instead. Hey, that's pretty sweet here, actually.
Yeah, that is solid. Now, noting that red is not really the artifact color, so you're just not going to have Metalcraft that often. Like if this was a black spell, it would be much, much better. But it's still just, it's a shock, right? Shock is just a really, really solid card to play in your deck. So if you want to rate it at that, it's probably like a C+.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Next is an interesting one for the current era. It's Pathbreaker Ibex. This is 4 green for a 3/3. And it is just a 3/3. But whenever this creature attacks, creatures you control get trample and +X until in a turn where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. I think the way to snapshot this, though, in the modern era is you pay 6 mana, they pay 2 for Lightning Strike, and you just maybe saw your win percentage just plummet. I just don't think that this is a place that you want to put mana these days. I would not.
Yeah, I mean, this needs to have Ward 4 or something. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's just, this is just too easy to kill. Just don't take this card. I know it's really exciting, and obviously if you do get to attack with this and you have a 5/5 in play, you probably win the game. But there's just going to be too many. It's just for 6 mana, you get a 3/3 body. If you're behind, it's not good.
Right.
And then if they just kill it, you just lost so much mana on the exchange. I just wouldn't be interested in taking this. Like a D.
Yeah, you can sum up, Modern Limited in the way that we've been doing by what do you give me right now, basically under the filter that I've been putting cards under, which is what happens if my opponent kills this, before I get to attack with it. And this is one of the worst cards for that. Next is Chrome Mox 0 for an artifact. It has imprint. When it enters, you may exile a non-artifact, non-land card from your hand, and you can tap Chrome Mox to add 1 mana of the exiled card's colors. This is an interesting one to throw in because Moxen in general, even ones that have costs, are generally extremely powerful in the short term. Can we afford, though, to exile actual spells from our hand just to turn on a Mox like this?
Yeah, I think just in normal, like being down a card is just too big of a disadvantage.
I agree.
Where it's just not worth it to play something like a Chrome Mox. Like this isn't Cube Draft where you're comboing off and doing something where your one card makes up for the fact that you lost the card.
Yeah.
There's just not enough effects like that exist in just a normal limited set where you'd want to play the Chrome Mox. And so I'd give Chrome Mox an F.
I would too. This last card, maybe best card in the set. Might be the best card in the whole set.
Why do they do this?
I don't know. This is just unreal. It's Sky Sovereign Console Flagship. It's 5 mana for a 6/5. It is a vehicle. I know we've been hard on vehicles, but it is. This one has flying and crew 3. But when it enters or attacks, it deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. This thing is 5 mana colorless that just comes in and kills something right away. And then it is huge flyer. Like this is the card that you don't care about the crew cost because you'll put whatever you can in to get this skyship in the air. Or Sky Sovereign in the air, and then it just kills something else.
It just this is an A+.
This
is going to be. This is. I can pretty confidently say this is just going to be the best card in the set.
Yes.
This card it was the best card by a mile when it came out previously, and I can't imagine things are different because this card is absolutely absurd.
Yeah,
I mean, 5 mana, ginormous flyer. ETB, you get value. On attack, you get value. This is kind of how you make vehicles good, right? Like you need to get that value. You make like Sky Sovereign, Smuggler's Copter, but they're being very careful with how powerful to make the modern day vehicles. And they're not going to make it on the power level of some of these things that we've seen.
No. And this is the knock that I have on vehicles is that they're either too powerful or they're just not very good, right? And we've seen that pattern happen a lot over time where, you get a Smuggler's Copter and it's like, well, that's just way too good, but there's no way to make it just like slightly worse. It's just like there's this big gap between crew costs and power level abilities. So at any rate, Sky Sovereign being on the bonus sheet and probably being the best card in the set's kind of annoying. It was like Embercleave, but at least the worst part is that it's colorless. So this is just going to like ruin sealed pools the whole time. And I got a Sky Sovereign. Anyway, crazy stuff here. Very difficult cards to grade this time around. I have to say, Paul, I've done a million of these set reviews, but these cards were tough. Like, vehicles are tough, and then the mana cost considerations on some of these cards were tough too, but very powerful, very interesting stuff, and I can't wait to dive in to the set. We're going to call it a show there. If you want to find us on social media, Marshall_LR, and Paul is Haumph pretty much everywhere. You can also see his YouTube channel in the description down below if you want to see Paul draft Aetherdrift. Head on over there right now and you can watch it. We also want to say thank you to our Patreon supporters as well as Ultimate Guard for supporting the show. If you want to find anything related to the show, it's going to be at lrcast.com, including links to all of our stuff, plus an archive with every episode of the show ever. That's going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for hanging out. We'll see you next week. Paul, how are we going to do this? My sign off is I have to write an article that's due in 2 days, and I only get to draft the set tomorrow. And then like 8 days after that, you and I are going to be in the booth in Chicago at the Pro Tour commentating professional drafters doing this. And this set just came out. In fact, it hasn't come out. We're recording this on Monday and it doesn't even come out till tomorrow.
Yeah. That's
Help.
Sounds like a you problem.
Well, it's going to be a you problem when I say, Paul, is this card any good? Did you play this one yet?
Well, fortunately, yeah. So yeah, there's basically for us, there's only like 2 opportunities to play prior to today, which was the early access event, which came out a few days ago, last week actually, and then there's the pre-release. But without that, yeah, it's really, really tough, and we don't have that much time. And you know what? The players don't either. Right? We only have like 10 days or something before the players need to lock in their constructed deck for the Pro Tour, and then also figure out what needs to be done in this limited format, which looks pretty tricky. A lot of build around cards that are hard to evaluate. We had a really tough time with these rares, and you know what? I wish you best of luck.
Thank you.
Because I know it's going to be tough. Maybe you can ask to get an extension, but this gives me, university vibes again. You're like cramming.
Yes.
Like Tuesday, the set's going to come out, and you're just like, all right, sorry, I got to clear my calendar. I'm cramming today. I got to basically master this format in a day and turn in my final paper in before it's due. So I do not envy your position, but you're the limited guy.
I'm going to do it. I'm going to start cramming right now.
There you go.